found out. Because the thing said that we can't ever have it.
We're good? I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7:04. This is a regular scheduled planning board meeting. It is April 23rd, 2024 at 7 p.m. Steve, could you take the roll?
Yes. Mayor Galise.
Here.
Mr. Gasparini. Councilman LaForgia.
Here.
Mr. Waldron. Mr. Spila.
Here.
Mr. Perrano. Here. Mr. Palafonte. Mr. Dutcher.
Here.
Chairman Cafone.
Here. Can I ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, we have a proposal from Bowman Consulting as traffic engineering expert dated March 18th, 2024. I'd like to accept this proposal and hire him as our traffic safety engineer. Do it.
Motion?
Is there a motion?
Second.
Second.
Okay, Mayor Galise.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Perrano.
Aye.
Mr. Palafonte. I'm sorry. Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Cafone.
Aye.
I'm going to swear the expert in. Raise your right hand. You swear firm testimony you're about to give before the board's true self you got.
I do,
And for the record, state your name.
certainly. Eric Keller, Keller, Vice President with Bowman Consulting Group, 6 Campus Drive, Parsippany, New Jersey.
And all your licenses are in full force and effect.
They are,
And your expertise is engineering, traffic specific.
correct.
Thank you. And you've been sworn before this court and other courts, and you're a recognized expert.
Yes, I have been.
Thank you.
Thank you. Adequate notice at this time, the date of this meeting was posted in the lobby of the municipal building, delivered to the Star Ledger and the Progress newspaper. No applicant will be heard after 11 p.m. So we have 3 applicants tonight, and there may be a slight chance that we may not hear all applicants. Just wanted to make you aware of that. Under our approval of minutes, I'd like approval of the minutes for March 12th, 2024 of a regular and reorganizational meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Mayor Galise.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Perrano. Chairman Cafone.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, under old business, we'll call up applicant 4-2019-5, Kingsbridge Office Park LLC, 6710 Kingsbridge Road, 264 Passaic Avenue, Block 2301, Lot 2. This is a carried over from April 9th, 2024.
And Mr. Chairman, just for the record, there's a number of members who were not here at that meeting, but they have all reviewed the transcript, and they have signed their certification, and it is with the board's secretary.
Thank
Just
you.
for the record.
Ready?
We're ready, Mr. LaParry.
File keeps getting bigger. Good evening again, members of the board. Good evening, Mr. Keller. As you know, my name is Michael LaParry. I'm an attorney with Mandelbaum Barrett. I'm counsel to the applicant, Kingsbridge Office Park LLC. We're here again tonight for a site plan application to allow the applicant to construct a 39-unit residential apartment building reserved to residents age 55 and older on an existing mixed-use site. You will recall we were before you on March 12th, at which time we put forth the testimony of our civil site engineer, our traffic engineer, our architect, our economic consultant, and our professional planner. When we concluded our presentation, the board had expressed some concerns about traffic, hence Mr. Keller's presence here this evening. So they asked us to adjourn the meeting till April 9th so they can retain Mr. Keller. Unfortunately, we were advised on April 8th that the board did not have a quorum, so the meeting was carried till this evening. We received Mr. Keller's report, which was dated April 16th, 2024. In addition, since the last hearing, we had our traffic consultant, Mr. Gary Dean, conduct some additional research on the site, and we had our engineer, Mr. Mike Lanzafama, confirm some of his previous data, and we'll go through some of that this evening. In addition, I conferred with the board attorney regarding some of the issues that were raised regarding, I guess, the usage of the car lofts. As you guys are probably aware, there are various resolutions that are related to this site from a couple different boards, and there were some, I guess, clarifications that were needed. It's my understanding that I think we have reached at least an understanding as to how the car lofts area is to be used, and we have indicated that, you know, there were a couple letters that came back and forth between the attorneys that I believe are probably part of the record at this point in time, so I don't know that we need to introduce them or discuss them really at length, but maybe if you want to have a conversation, we could, but I think we have an understanding as to that the applicant is going to proceed with the use as it was approved. We will discuss a little bit. Mr. Lanzafama, who is the applicant for the zoning board approval, will discuss and confirm that the parking counts that were approved are unchanged at this point in time. We were also made aware that we did not provide sufficient testimony regarding the dog park, the location of the dog run. I won't call it a dog park, it's a dog run. So we'll briefly identify that when Mr. Lanzafama testifies. And again, we're seeking a variance for building coverage, which is going to increase 2.5%. So without further ado, I'll introduce my site engineer, Mr. Mike Lanzafama of Casey and Keller. He was sworn in already. I don't know that he needs to be sworn again. You know he's still under oath.
Yes, I acknowledge I'm still under oath. My name is Michael Lanzafama, Lanzafama, licensed professional engineer, land surveyor and planner, principal with the firm of Casey and Keller Incorporated, 258 Main Street, Millburn, New Jersey. All my licenses are still current and in good standing.
Mike, do you want to start maybe with the dog park? We'll get the easy one out of the way. And just basically, you can identify where the proposed, I keep saying a park, it's a dog run, I believe. It's just a fenced off piece of grass. If you could identify where it is. It appears that we may need a variance for that. So if you could just explain where it is on the site and why it's there.
So what I have up on the easel currently is the color rendering of the site plan that we had prepared for this application. And the dog run that Mr. LaParry was referring to is located on the north side of Kingsbridge Road at the end of the cul-de-sac, adjoining the parking area for building number 7. That area appeared to be, to us, a good location for this type of amenity for the apartment complex that we are proposing as part of this application, as well as the existing apartment buildings that have already been constructed on the site. At one point, we had a dog run located just to the west of building number 6. That was according to this plan and on this application, is being converted to a playground area to be used for that building. And then the dog run would be relocated to that side. Technically, it's an accessory structure in the front yard. However, no matter where you put an accessory structure along these buildings or for these buildings, they almost always fall in a front yard. So we felt that this was a good location for it based upon the existing site conditions as to existing parking and existing buildings that were lawfully existing on the property. So in my mind, I believe that that would qualify as a C1 variance because of the exceptional hardship in as much as there is not a lot of locations in which to place such an amenity. And that you could argue it as a C2 as well, because it is a positive. It certainly supports the uses that are on the property currently, as well as what is being proposed. So it's a nice amenity to have. It's not a huge facility. It's a small area at the end of Kingsbridge Road.
And you don't see it as a detriment in any way to our,
No, I
either?
don't see a detriment to the public good or the intent and purpose of Fairfield zoning plan as a result of this addition to this complex.
Okay. I think then we could leave it at that and move on to the next issue. I know there was a question raised, and I'm trying to take them in order of hopefully the easiest. There was a question raised about the, I guess, the square footage of the buildings. Can you just please briefly address, I guess, that issue, or maybe put to rest any potential discrepancy?
Yes, we prepared an exhibit for tonight. Actually, it was actually submitted as part of the original application. We did do some slight modifications to it based upon the Karloff's question and how that space was used and how the zoning board had reacted to that. So we did update it. I do have some handouts here for board members if you want to have one right.
You want to mark that, Council?
What's that?
You want to mark this?
Yeah, we're gonna need to mark it.
I'm not sure.
I'm gonna flip back through my notes and see if I could.
Maybe there's more than one, sorry.
More than one?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was more than one. Steve, you have a copy?
I'll keep that.
No, oh, there's more, no, there's more.
Okay, we'll go with A5, and we'll make sure we didn't identify it.
He says he's got
We're
it.
gonna call this A5. Mark it with today's date.
And what I've marked as Exhibit A5 is a parking demand calculations. What we did, because of the mixed uses that exist on the property, we have such a variety of uses, commercial uses, recreational uses, residential uses. When we first started this application, we developed a spreadsheet to make sure that we covered the various uses and made it clear to the board and to the municipality how we were applying the required parking demands for the various uses. All of the square footages that we've indicated for office, warehouse, storage, indoor recreation, and apartment amenities, as well as the school, are all taken from our lease records, our surveys of the buildings, and these are as-built conditions. So we're very confident that the numbers we're reflecting on this spreadsheet are in fact accurate and complete. So as you can see, if you go down, what we did is we color-coded the various buildings, and you look in the lower left-hand corner is a key that color codes to the building. So for example, street number 6 is in green, street number 7 is in purple, et cetera, et cetera. So if you look at the spreadsheet, the first thing that we had modified from what was previously submitted was the car loft space. We had the mezzanine at 4,226 square feet. In our original submission, we were going to earmark that as amenity space for the new apartment building. So we've taken that out of the mix and we've put it back into the parking demand requirements. And what we had gotten approved at our Board of Adjustment hearing is that that space would be considered office space. So using the normal parking requirement for office space and the 4,226 square feet comes out to 16.9 spaces. The remainder of the spaces indicated on the spreadsheet are consistent with what was submitted, except for, again, we've made some adjustments in the parking demand for the new building, for the 39-unit building that we have here. is because 4 of those apartments, 4 one-bedroom apartments, would be earmarked to be used by ARC's residents and clientele.
Are they gonna be deed restricted?
Michael?
We could. If the board would require that, then we could deed restrict them.
And since the ARC residents do not drive, we eliminated that parking demand from those 4 units, those 4 one-bedroom units, which under your senior housing requirement is 1 parking space for every unit. So when you go through the spreadsheet, we came up with, and taking into account the 41 EV charging stations that we are proposing on the site, taking that 1 credit for each of those charging stations, that reduced our parking demand to 386 spaces.
Now, I have a question with regard to that.
Sure.
Now, that the legislation came in after a number of the units were already built, correct?
Correct.
So is it prospective or retrospective?
I believe that if you're providing new EV charging stations, that you should get the 1-for-1 credit. That's my reading of the law, but that's open to, I guess, your interpretation or the board's interpretation, or, but it's my feeling that you take that 1-for-1 credit. But even if you didn't, you'll hear testimony from our traffic consultant that the purpose of this spreadsheet and the number of parking spaces where we say that we are entitled to consider in our application is simply to identify whether we're compliant or need somewhat of a variance. We had testimony on prior applications that made it very clear, and the board planner even agreed with us on a number of occasions, that the symbiotic relationship between the commercial uses, the recreational uses, and the residential uses that we have on this property really work well together. That their parking demand, there's different peaks, there's different times when you're gonna need additional parking, and the fact that this new building is senior housing, which has even a lesser parking demand, which is acknowledged by your own
55 and up,
parking.
correct?
55 and up, correct. So it's more about identifying, number 1, do we need a variance? And if we need a variance, what's the extent of the variance? So if there's some contention or disagreement about the credit for the EV charging, I don't believe it's gonna be significant enough to tip the scale in favor of denying the application. That's my opinion.
I have a question with regard to the symbiotic relationship. You agree that uses change, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Tenants move out.
Absolutely. So the parking demand based upon this spreadsheet comes out to 386 cars, which is what is reflected on our site plan drawings. And our parking provided, if you include the 38-car parking variance that were previously granted, comes out to 386 provided. So it was our opinion that a parking variance would not be required for this particular project for the construction of the additional residential units, the 39 units on the new building, Building 10A, we're calling it.
So the last time we spoke, the fire department had requested that they would wanted 20 feet on the, I believe it's the southern end of the property.
Correct.
Have you removed those
No,
parking spots?
we did not. What I did is I did an analysis using the ladder truck as well as the latest pumper that was recently purchased by the fire department. So I have that as an exhibit as well. So this was the exhibit we had presented at the last hearing. For some reason it's not marked, but this was the exhibit that showed.
You want to mark it?
Yeah, let's mark it now, Mike, if you could. We'll make it A6, just so that we don't, that's okay. We'll mark it as A6, maybe because we submitted it in advance, but we'll mark it as A6 so that there's no confusion. And if you could just throw today's date on it too, please.
And what has been marked as A6 is what we're calling the truck turning template, fire truck. It's drawing number FT1. And what it shows is the exhibit demonstrates that the fire truck can enter from Passaic Avenue as well as Kingsbridge Road and navigate around the site. What we had envisioned originally was that in the southeast corner, we could remove those temporary bollards that divide off the adjoining apartment complex, modify the curb in there so that the fire truck could navigate through that area. So we went back after some conversations with the fire department. We did a second analysis with the same fire truck entering from Kingsbridge Road and navigating through the eastern side of Building 10 up and around the back. That driveway is too close to the building for the truck to set up in that area. And that would be the reason they would need the wider driveway, is the outriggers. But just for the truck to be able to maneuver around the building, we can clearly demonstrate that we would be able to do that safely, even with those cars that we have proposed in that area. We also took the liberty of running the pumper truck. By the way, this would be you want to mark this as A7 then?
Yes.
This is FT2.
When did you have the fire truck driving around this property? Did you actually have the?
Oh, no, this is computer generated. This is, we use software called AutoTurn. So we can take the geometry of the fire truck, enter it into the computer database, and then it simulates the movements of the truck.
Like, did you present this to the fire department?
We talked to them about it, but we did not present this particular exhibit yet.
So my question is, and it's great that you did all this work, but the fire department wanted 20 feet. And so you're disputing that you don't want to give them 20 feet.
Okay.
And you didn't confer with the fire department that you didn't want to give them the 20 feet. And the last time we spoke, we kind of agreed you would remove the spots to give them the 20 feet. So we're kind of going a little bit in circles.
We haven't done that yet.
Okay,
no.
so you're going to do that.
Well, we're gonna go back to the fire department, demonstrate that the truck can maneuver in that area and have that conversation with
So
them.
you don't want, so if tactics and strategies of the fire department dictate they could stop there and work in that area, and they could go through a door there and fight a fire, it's in your opinion that they shouldn't have to do that?
They wouldn't set up the ladder truck to fight a fire in
I'm
that
talking
position.
about a
That's all
pump, I'm talking about a pumper, I'm talking about
Right.
whatever type of firefighting tactics they need to do.
Correct. Well, we'll have to go back and talk to them.
Okay.
Demonstrate that, in our opinion, we think it works and it's safe.
Okay.
And if he agrees, great. If not, then we'll have to talk about how we're gonna widen that driveway to
Driveway.
20 feet.
Okay.
So, and then finally, the third exhibit, which should have been FT3, which staff forgot to put the 3 on. We'll mark this as A8. A8. And what this represents is the new Pierce Arrow pumper that you recently purchased, and how that can easily make that maneuver through that area in the driveway we have provided without being negatively impacted by any of the parking spaces. That's the demonstration we tried to do. And we'll certainly have that conversation again with the fire chief and come to some agreement that he feels that is safe and adequate for fighting fires at that location. The only other thing I want to bring up, and this is another exhibit. This is in response, I believe, to Mr. Keller's review memo, where I believe he talks about distribution of parking and whether or not we have enough parking spaces in and around what this exhibit is entitled is Parking Allocation Exhibit. And we would mark this as A9.
We don't have that either.
We don't have any of these.
And what A9 does is we use two colors to code potential tenant parking and potential,
Excuse me, were any of these provided
No.
10 days prior to the hearing?
I was just gonna ask you
They were-
that. How come you didn't submit a new set of plans with all of your changes? Because obviously, we can't really see that from here.
well,
So-
they're not
concern-
changes, it's just additional information.
But my concern is.
I would like to have read it over the
professionals.
week.
They-
Right, so we didn't get Mr. Keller's report until, was it April 20th or so, or last week. So in order to respond to Mr. Keller's report, we obviously couldn't have given it to you 10 days in advance because we didn't get his report 10 days in advance of the hearing. So, you know, we're doing this to sort of demonstrate how we could accommodate the issues that he raised. It's not a change, this is not necessarily a change,
Listen,
we're
I
just
totally
showing.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's hard for us to make a decision when you're showing something on the board and making changes of some sort without us having a few days
Right.
to absorb it.
I understand, but what this is here, this is the exhibit of our existing parking layout that had been submitted to the board.
I understand.
There were some issues Mr. Keller raised in his letter. What we're doing is we're trying to overlay it with some color to show a visual.
That's great.
That
but
we
I
have
would-
parking in the same
I would love
area.
to have had it a few days ago, to read it over the weekend, to say, okay, let me see what, what particular changes they made based on our
So,
expert's letter.
Look, I totally understand. We didn't have the benefit of having the report much further in advance either.
And
So-
that could have been a perfect time for you to say, let's not be heard tonight, let's wait another night,
I,
instead of not giving us the information.
well, I don't, again, I think Mr. Lanzafama should be able to explain this exhibit thoroughly. It's not a change of anything on the plan. Again, it's just showing you, and with the blue and the yellow, where the parking is going to be allocated, so we spread it out a little differently on the site. That way, just to demonstrate that the residential uses have parking near the residential buildings, and the commercial units will park on the outsides, so that there's no issue.
It's up to you, Mr.
I
Chairman.
have to be honest with you, I would rather have seen the plans prior to the way we're doing it.
I agree 1,000%. There's obviously, they wanted 20 feet, well, we don't need 20 feet, we're gonna work with
Right.
15, these are changes, these are substantial changes of safety. And we're going in blind looking at these, I can't even see it from this angle.
Well, since we're here and we have the exhibit, I think we could at least try to work through it and maybe you could ask some questions on based upon what you see. Again, it's not a very complicated exhibit, this
But
one here.
you realize it may not come to a vote tonight, then. So you're gonna sit here and do your testimony, but you're not gonna get a vote tonight.
Well, we would like a vote tonight, but let's,
You wanna
Go
have a
through our
recess
testimony.
maybe with your client and talk
well,
about
we
it
still have our
first?
testimony to get through. We have another expert. I mean,
Okay.
maybe we can clarify it and you could ask the questions throughout the hearing and maybe that will change and maybe not, but you'll let us know. But I think we can continue to go through our testimony.
Okay.
Well, what we've marked as Exhibit A9 is a colorization of the proposed parking plan that was submitted as part of the application. And what we've tried to demonstrate in this exhibit is the available parking that you have for the two residential buildings, the one existing structure, as well as the proposed senior housing structure. And the blue represents the parking spaces that could be allocated to those residential uses. There's 108 spaces in and around those two buildings. Those are represented in the blue color. And in the yellow color are 82 spaces that could be allocated for employees of the various commercial uses.
Are those
and
the banked spaces?
Those are built space. These are, the ones along the south side of the property are built.
Where are the banked spaces?
They were the banked spaces. They ended up being built. Yeah, they were built.
Or did you ever come before the
Yeah,
board?
they were approved to be built.
But would
Yeah,
you-
we got a variance for not paving them, and we had done that about 3 approvals ago, I believe.
because I didn't see it.
You have a copy of it?
Not with me, no.
Okay.
Steve?
But in any event, if you look at the number of apartments in and around that area, you're looking at 75 apartments that would be located in that area, and we have the ability to park 108 spaces, and then obviously the commercial space, the yellow spaces that are definitely would be available. And remember that the parking demand that is indicated also is based upon the residential site improvement standards, as you know, 1/2 car for every unit, every apartment is dedicated to visitor spaces. So there is an allocation already built into the numbers that will accommodate not only the tenants, but their visitors as well. And that was the purpose of the exhibit, to show that.
Will all of these,
When you say allocation, does that mean they're going to be marked for use by the apartments, or you're just talking?
No, we just wanted to demonstrate that,
So anybody could park anywhere, though?
sure.
Or we could designate them if it became necessary.
Can I just, one question, in this particular colorization, are there still resident parking spaces across streets?
We don't have any indicated there, no.
So no resident will have to cross a street to get to their building?
They could if they chose to,
or if not, are available?
yeah, if there happened to be.
That's the point of why we did this. But we put this exhibit to show that that would not be necessary or required.
But the resident doesn't get a space with the building,
Assigned spot.
the assigned spot. So they might have to walk across a street.
Or we could designate them as residential or commercial.
Yeah, but doesn't that work against your whole theory of this whole blended community of parking and mixed use and commercial people go out, residential
Right,
people
well,
come in?
exactly.
You
You don't
can't
need
have it
that.
both ways.
Right, we wouldn't need that many, it's showing as a demonstration, right? We could potentially mark some spots as residential, we don't need that many. We're showing more than we needed to.
Right. Obviously, the garage spaces would be earmarked for that apartment building, but the rest of the spaces, basically, that was as you pointed out, that it's first come, first serve, and it's the way that these uses exist that it works so well. And you'll hear testimony from our traffic consultant who did monitor the site to see how it functioned, to see what the spaces were, what the space availability would be at various times. And you'll see that the numbers make sense, they work. And that's what we're trying to prove.
Did you make any changes to how the car loft would receive cars and how cars would get to the site?
No.
Made no changes. After we talked about the trailers, after we talked about trailers on the street, dropping cars off.
But we said that, it was our opinion, that the tractor trailers or the delivery trucks would be able to drive to the back of the building where they can load and unload.
I totally understand that they're
But
blocking parking
that's a
spots.
management, that doesn't require a site plan revision, that's just property management.
But should there be a
No.
loading and unloading?
Unloading
zone?
zone. Just like all warehouses have required, and according to the ordinances, they need loading and unloading zones.
We have 2 loading areas in the back.
Okay, so if an 18-wheeler pulls up, where are they parking without blocking cars and blocking traffic?
They would park in this area right here.
What's the distance in that area? Because according to the ordinance, there's a required size that it needs to be.
But these type of deliveries, they're not the tractor trailers.
I could show you pictures on my phone of tractor trailers there in the street.
The way they would unload and load, they would have to parallel park in that area. And they would have to be.
It's currently not happening, is what I'm trying to tell you.
But that's a management issue. That's not a site plan issue.
Well,
that
it
we
is
can-
a
we
site
can
plan
amend the
issue because
plan.
we're looking to put an apartment building here, and you're gonna have a tractor trailer blocking parking spots. So this is part of the whole site plan. We've seen things that need to be addressed, because we're looking at the whole block and lot now.
Understood.
We're not just looking at this apartment building.
Well, I apologize then, because when I left the meeting last time, I thought it was a matter of management, not a site plan revision.
But did you use that computer program with the fire trucks with regard to a tractor trailer or no?
Yeah, the tractor trailer can maneuver in and out of here.
So you did use,
without a
you
problem.
ran,
Sure.
so then you do know.
So,
Well, I
and it
know
could-
that they can maneuver
they can
through
just
the
drive
site.
through it, they can't.
Right, he knows, and he just said that. The question is whether or not there's
the
enforcement, and I think the question's an
Now, the
enforcement issue.
question is, I agree, probably could drive through. Where's it stopping and unloading?
Right.
That's the question.
Well, as I said, what we had envisioned is that they would parallel park where the two loading areas are, and they would offload in that area. That area is probably, the driveway itself is 24 feet wide. And then the length of that area, I'm just approximating, is probably about 40 feet long in that area.
So did you do a traffic study to see how it would pull in and back into that spot? And is that where the cars get loaded? Because when I go there, the cars are being loaded on this end of the building of where the apartment building would be.
On the west side of it.
Correct. They're not going in there. That's not
What-
not
what
part of
we-
it.
What we had envisioned was the truck would come in, could make this maneuver, pull in, and then parallel park in here, and then offload, and then bring the cars into one of the driveways, into the building. You can enter here.
But Mike, that would be like, they would probably need a fire lane there. They would be parked like in a fire lane.
But they're not gonna be there that long. It doesn't take long to offload.
Yeah, and I understand the concern, and believe me, but this is all for an approved use, and this has nothing to do necessarily with whether or not if the building gets built or the building doesn't get built.
The approved use doesn't allow that.
Okay, and that's an enforcement issue.
That's
We
not-
understand that, but
the
I'm saying
enforcement issue-
if a new building goes in or doesn't go
Who
in.
enforces it?
What's that?
Who enforces it there on that
It
property?
would, well, it would be whoever is in charge of that, the police department, or it could be
You
the,
give Title 39 approval for the site?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you did.
Okay, then it would be the
But-
zoning
but
official.
Wouldn't it be the owner who would be required to enforce it?
Yes,
And who owns the loft?
we own the property.
Well,
We
who
don't own,
owns the
we don't
loft?
own, you mean, who's the tenant?
Yeah, no, the owner of that business.
I don't know his name.
Which is your client.
I don't think he owns the law. If he owns the property.
He owns the business.
Okay. I
So
don't-
he's already not following the.
Yeah, okay, but that's enforcement issues, right? And again, whether or not
But it's not
the
happening.
applicant.
Enforcement how? When the owner of the
So
building.
we could
is
put it,
not-
we could put it in here, in this resolution as well, that,
In the zoning resolution.
what's that?
It's already in the zoning resolution.
What is that exactly that's in the zoning resolution that's
That
being
the
violated?
person is supposed to drive the car to the site. and that
Drive the
There's
car- and there's
no
supposed to be no
tractor
truck
trailers.
there. And
Okay,
you're
again,
shooting
if
us now,
If
tractor
that
trailers
is,
are there.
if that is a known issue, the zoning officer should issue, some sort of a letter asking us not to do it any longer if we're in violation. And we'll either have to comply or challenge that some ordinance or resolution allows it. But for purposes of this application, which is to put a residential building, I don't want to get lost in the weeds on how this one business down the road operates itself.
But that's part of the issue with why this is happening. That's why this is all coming up, because you're putting a 55 and older next to the car loft. The car loft seems to be a little bit of an issue with everybody up here.
Right, well, you're raising an issue about a certain activity, and again, that's something, if it shouldn't be done that way, I think Mr. Lanzafama is indicating how it's going to be done, or how it should be done. If you're indicating it's not being done properly, that's something we would need to address, but I don't
Under
think it's
testimony,
necessary.
your client said he wasn't going to do it. Under oath, he said that's not going to happen. So now it's happening, and now it's our problem that he's doing it, and that you want us to enforce it? Is that what you're telling us?
No, we'll have to revisit it and make sure that we're not doing it improperly,
He
but
said
again,
it under oath.
yeah,
Doesn't
okay.
an oath mean anything to anybody?
I think we're going a little too far.
I don't think you're going too far. I gotta be honest. I think there's a lack of confidence. And I've sat on both boards, to be honest with you. I've sat on both boards and watched this happen. There's a lack of confidence. One thing's being said and another thing's being done.
One anyway.
Constantly. We'd have to park the zoning officer on that property to enforce,
Well, that's not-
constantly.
Well, look, I
Well,
get-
let's be honest.
I-
We're gonna
I
be honest, let's be
understand-
honest.
I understand the concern, all right, and we'll have to work to fix that issue if it's a violation of the resolution. But again, we demonstrated that we have some room for it to be done if it's being done and where it should be done in the loading area.
So the second floor is gonna be used as what?
I'm sorry?
The second floor of the car loft is going to be used as what?
That is approved as amenity space to the Karloff's business.
He had mentioned that he's gonna use it for office space.
It's calculated as office space.
So
for
he's
purpose-
calculating his office space, but it's gonna be used as amenity space.
So when we had to
Help me to
find,
understand.
it was approved as amenity space by the zoning board of adjustment. It's going to be, continue to be used as it was approved.
So then how do you calculate it for parking as office space?
Because there's no, I don't know why we
Yeah,
use that one.
there
There's
was
no
not,
amenity
there was
space.
not a metric to apply. So we applied the office space requirement, and the zoning board accepted that as an appropriate application of parking demand.
I don't know about that one.
Isn't there offices or office suites attached to the loft? Is that part of the same building?
Yes.
Yeah. On the first floor or the second? Yeah, the first floor. Right.
And that's factored into the chart that you see here. There's 6,991 square feet of office space on the first floor.
So you're saying there's 16.9 for the mezzanine office space, but it's an amenity. There's no calculation for an amenity, because you don't know what the amenity is, or what would the calculation be for an amenity as he's currently using it?
Yeah, like you said, you can't really, depends on how it's being used on a specific
If he's
day.
using it to host 200, up to 250 people, what's
Well,
that?
that's a whole different animal.
Well, that's
That's
what's
where
being
we're at.
advertised.
That's where we're at.
Well,
And there's pictures.
And there's internet, and there's advertisements, and there's all kinds of
so, you know, again, as we discussed at the last hearing, and the council and I had this discussion at length, we agreed that because there's this issue with this discrepancy as to how it was approved or how it was being used, we will continue to use it as what your council interpreted the use to be.
office space.
Well, it's amenity space to the Karloff's residents. It's calculated as office space, but it'll be used for.
Not the residents.
No, I'm sorry, the Karloff
Because
tenants,
I
if you
think
want
the
to call them
testimony-
that.
The last testimony, your client came up and basically testified he was gonna use it for amenity space for all the people.
Right, and then we had a conversation, and we sort of narrowed that down so that there wasn't any discrepancy, because there was some discrepancy in the resolutions as to whether or not that was allowed or not. And we said, we'll use your interpretation, because yours was more restrictive.
My interpretation is in the letter, which restricts the time to use it, the number of employees.
Well, I don't agree with the number of employees, even though you wrote it down. I don't agree with that. But at the same time,
So then we really have it, so you're really not agreeing with my interpretation.
I don't
which is
agree with your
fine.
limitation to 2 people. We said there would be 2 employees for security at all times because there was a concern about that. It didn't say only 2 employees. So that's the only discrepancy I have with you on that one. We said we had 3 at all times, you said 2, and we were limited to that, and I don't agree with that. But again, we will use it as approved, and if we have to work on that 1 employee, we could, I'm sure, figure that out.
Actually, on the internet, there's, I think, 9 employees there.
Well, that was 2 employees at all time for security purposes. That's why I'm saying I don't necessarily agree with the limitation on 2 employees for this amount of space, when we also have it calculated as having 32 spaces allocated for that, which was approved. No. I don't have any other questions of my witness, but I'll let the board ask some more questions if they have them.
So the dog park, so how far off the property line is the dog park? Refer to that.
Could you explain the size and the fence and locks and?
So from the property line to the dog park is approximately 75 feet. The size of the dog park is 30 feet wide by 40 feet deep. It's a turf area. It'll be fenced enclosure, and then there's a small, like a railroad tie curb around the perimeter of it.
So Mike, that dog park is 75 feet off the cul-de-sac
Oh,
property
no.
line?
Oh,
Property
I thought
line?
You said off the property line. I measured to the.
Yeah, I meant the front yard property line.
It's pretty much, it's right on the property line, right on the right-of-way line.
Right.
The tip of it just touches.
Okay. Is there a sidewalk going around the cul-de-sac?
Yes, there's a sidewalk that goes all the way around the cul-de-sac and allows you entrance into the dog park.
And that sidewalk is used for the other tenants back, the 99 units in the back also, right? The sidewalk? So if they want to walk out to Passaic Avenue, they can?
Well, the sidewalk goes all the way out to Passaic Avenue, but there's no sidewalk that goes up the driveway.
Right.
What are the restrictions on dogs? You know, are there size limits?
Yeah,
Well, let me just finish.
Yeah,
And
I'm sorry.
what are the restrictions on the lease, if any? What does it say in the lease about dogs?
There is a limitation on the size of the dogs and
What's
the number of
that?
dogs. I don't know the exact number. You'd have to ask the owner, the manager. But I know we did have a conversation that they restrict the size of the dog and the number of dogs.
Mike, I'm sorry if you had said it, but who's allowed to use the dog park?
It would-
And how was that controlled?
Well, the dog park would be used by the tenants, the residential tenants. I would imagine the commercial tenants could possibly use it if they chose to. I imagine it could be regulated with some type of a key fob or something to allow people that are only residents or tenants of the park to be able to use it.
So are the restrictions on the commercial different than the restrictions on the residential?
With regard to,
The dogs, the size, the
no,
number?
I would imagine not.
So if you have,
Because
if
it's
you're a
small
commercial
area.
owner, there's no limit on the number of dogs, or?
No, I said I would imagine that it would be similar to the apartments. The number of dogs and the size of the dog, it would have to be controlled, sure.
What exists in that location currently? Is it vegetated? Is it open?
It's just a vegetated area.
Okay, so would that reduce the buffer then from those residential properties to the site?
No,
if you
it's
had to carve into them?
it's just a lawn panel at this point.
Okay, and again, I think you gave the setback to that adjacent property line. Is it accurate that those, on the other side of that lot line are single-family homes?
That is correct. And then there's probably another 50 or 60 feet to the back of their homes.
Right. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
A couple questions. So you indicated that there's a sidewalk that runs around the cul-de-sac, but looking at the plan, from the sidewalk on the cul-de-sac to the entrance to the dog park, there is no sidewalk. So does that mean that somebody needs to walk into the driveway and then back into the, or has that been updated on your exhibit?
They didn't, yeah, there's supposed to be a sidewalk here. You can see there's a sidewalk in front of the gate. There was supposed to be a sidewalk alongside that driveway as well.
Okay, so,
It's not reflected.
so somebody would not have to walk into the driveway?
That's correct.
Okay, and then likewise, you have a sidewalk along Kingsbridge Road. If I'm in any one of the two existing residential buildings or the proposed residential building, how do I get from the lobby out to the sidewalk along Kingsbridge? Would there, unless I'm missing it, I don't see sidewalk connections from the buildings out to Kingsbridge Road.
They're not. They would walk down the driveway area.
Okay, so there's no separate sidewalk from the buildings?
Not in that area, no.
Okay.
There is a sidewalk on the west side between building A and the new building. There's a sidewalk and a crosswalk that brings you to this sidewalk. This building, the sidewalk actually terminates at the last parking stall. That could be extended to the sidewalk on Kingsbridge as well. That would be done without too much difficulty.
So for the senior building, the sidewalk that goes out the east side of that building and then alongside the number 10 building, is that courtyard area or that connection to the proposed senior building, is that connect into the lobby area?
The lobby area exists in the front portion here. There's an allocation here, and then here you can enter in that sidewalk that's midway down the building, and you can gain access to here. There's also some secondary exit points that also tie into that sidewalk system.
Okay, so the senior building would have access to a sidewalk that leads
Yes.
directly to Kingsbridge?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I had on the dog park.
Anybody other questions on the dog park?
Yeah, Mike, a little bit more on the dog park. The concrete sidewalk that you were talking about to connect it in, has that been factored in the impervious coverage? Because I know you were in a variance condition. I mean,
We
to
have-
increase would be another
I'll have
variance
to
request.
I'll have to double check if that little piece was included or not. It was
Okay.
our intention to include it.
Okay.
But I'd have to check.
Okay. The other thing, a little bit different, on the other side of Building 7, in the rear parking lot, you have an area of heavy-duty concrete pavement. Why don't you speak a little bit about why that pavement was constructed and the intended user of that? As I gotta say, I was out there the other day, and there was some pretty heavy trucks that were on that spot, and
Well,
it should be all striped for parking,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, we had done the concrete because the refuse area was back there, and we felt that the refuse truck would have to do some K-type turn maneuvers, and we found that the asphalt tends to get ripped up when that happens.
Okay.
So we decided to make that area concrete. Other than that, that was the only purpose for the concrete.
Okay, so that back end is all intended as it's striped off for single car parking and potentially residents too, you know, like we had spoke about, could go back there and find spots.
That is correct, Steve.
Okay,
Mike, there's no construction equipment back there being stored?
I haven't been back there. If there's construction equipment, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. What is the distance from the curb to the last parking spot on number 2, in that driveway that he's talking about on Building 7?
Chairman, where are you referring to?
From there to out to the property line out on Kingsbridge.
Out to Kingsbury? Is approximately 260 feet.
So you don't allow for a turnaround there, huh? I've only seen that sometimes when all the parking spaces are taken and someone drives there, they have to back out 250 feet.
Well, that's why that area is kind of widened out a bit.
Mhm.
You should be able to make a K-turn in
K-turn.
that area.
That's not what was happening.
I can't see this. Can you just give me an exact number again, please? I'm concerned about the parking for the resident, the senior, the restricted building, where the spaces are filled and the residents now have to park elsewhere. And some of that area might be the paver area. And where it shows that, you know, in inclement weather, that might not be the best kind of area to walk over and around, especially for older people. What's the number of parking spaces that will not be available for the people in that building?
So
In
if
other
I-
words,
if I-
that when all the spaces are filled underneath or where they are, now the people have to park far away. Now, you're gonna have people that don't move their car for a day, 2 days, 3 days maybe. So those spaces, prime spaces, let's call them, are gonna be filled on a more regular basis and far away. Now, you're gonna go shopping, Target, ShopRite, wherever, and carry groceries and bags a distance. How far is the farthest point they have to walk with their bags?
For the people, you're talking about the senior building.
The senior
new
building,
Well, it depends on, obviously, where they would park.
Obviously.
We had earmarked, as you know, we have the garage spaces on the west side of the building.
correct.
And then we have a whole series of spaces between the two residential buildings.
Right.
We have available spaces along the back, as well as some available spaces close to the front. Now, you have different walkways that could bring them into different locations on the building. So depending upon where they might park, you could conceivably, if you, maybe what we could do as an exhibit is maybe take a circle, say, call it 100 feet, seems to be a reasonable walking distance in my mind. And put circles around the corners of the building. I could prepare an exhibit and see what parking spaces, how many spaces actually fall into that area. If that helps the board understand what the available parking is.
I mean, I'm sorry, to me, that's a major concern for the parking and the walking. I have to tell you, that's where I'm looking at.
Okay, all right, maybe we can do that exhibit for you for the next year. Make a note. I've been trying to write things down so I don't forget it this time.
Mr. LaParry, so a 55 and over as opposed to a senior building, what would be like the differences? A 55 and over, does one person have to be 55? Does it have to be? Usually. Everyone in the apartment has to be 55? Can a single father have his daughter live with them in the 2-bedroom?
Yeah, there's an allowance for the rare instance that someone is not under 55 that lives with the 55 senior.
So someone on a lease has to be 55? Is that basically how this would work?
Yeah, that would correct. The occupant, there has to be an occupant that's 55 years old.
Gentleman that married somebody 45, they could both live there?
Yes.
Have 2 cars?
Not in every situation. I mean, there are cases where every occupant has to be above 55, but that's not the typical scenario of why it was designed that way.
When you guys keep saying senior, I think of like a senior housing, like, I kind of, 55 isn't a senior to me.
Yeah,
Right.
That's not
I know.
really
You
senior to
guys,
me
it
either.
is.
Any other comments or suggestions that we could be prepared better next time?
So you really never answered the question as
I'm
far
sorry.
as the furthest distance from that building to
Well,
where it could be.
And let's say we arbitrarily take 100 feet from, say, here, we could park. So you could park anywhere.
I don't even know if it's
Anywhere in this area
This is just thrown
would provide you with parking for the senior building.
Yeah.
And the senior building is in the front.
No offices.
Senior building. So we had earmarked in that other exhibit that I had presented, there was 108 spaces available in and around that immediate area,
108.
108. And between the two buildings, there's 75 apartments.
Mike, what's the document you're referring to? Because you're making some circles on there with the 100-foot radius, so
That was,
let's remark that now as the,
okay, this was A1, I believe, or A2 from the prior hearing.
well, we could remark it as a new one with your drawings on it. A10. Just give me the name of it.
A10 is a colorized version of the overall site plan with some markings on it.
we'll call it a 100-foot, approximate 100-foot radius circle. Yes.
I just have one last question. With regard to the ARC school, in that calculation of 27 parking spaces, does that take into account the vans that are parked on site?
That is the parking requirement based upon the code. The vans, I don't recall how many vans there are, but it appears that the number of spaces allocated according to the zoning was much more than what they need. So I guess it would include the vans then. We can do an inventory of that as well, see what the van spaces are and what the demand is for the ARC school.
And Mike, while we're up here, just one quick question, because I know we had some changes to this parking demand calculations. When using the mezzanine office space calculations, that is based upon, just for clarification, what was approved at the zoning board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and just so everyone's on the same page, we have, we requested the minutes, or I'm sorry, the transcripts from that hearing where we got an approval from the zoning board. Those, that transcript couldn't be produced by the zoning board. So what we do have here are the minutes from the June 18th, 2019 hearing, which indicates that we were discussing it as amenity space when we made the application, when it was approved, and how we would be using the calculations to support, of office space to support that area. This is, again, the Township of Fairfield Board of Adjustment, June 18, 2019 meeting minutes. I don't know if we need to mark it or anything since it's a public record, but I'll mark it as A11, just so we have it since I referenced it. And that's all consistent with that approval.
That's correct.
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Lanzafama on the parking, and I'll keep it to the civil part of it and leave the rest of the parking stuff to Mr. Dean.
Just remain civil, Eric.
Yes, I will remain civil. So, if you don't mind if I call you Mike? I'll trip over Lanzafama
I know
after a
you
couple
will.
of times. Thanks, Mike. So, the table that you presented tonight as Exhibit A5, that supersedes the square footages that are on the site plans that have been previously submitted, and the prior tabulation. This is the number that we're going with, which is
That-
117,580 square feet.
Correct.
Okay, because there's been a bunch of different numbers,
Floating
which we don't need to talk about if that's the number. Okay, so that's the number. You mentioned that the supportive housing, obviously, the residents don't drive, but we've had a number of other applications in other communities where we've talked about supportive housing. Is there, and I don't know if you've gotten to this point, is there staff that's going to be associated with that? And is there a provision that needs to be made for that staff for supportive housing units?
Yeah, the vans that exist on the site currently would be utilized to transport those tenants that would be in those apartments.
Okay, but is there going to be somebody who will be in those apartments?
I don't have an answer to that question.
Like an aide or something?
Right, an
Yeah,
aide,
like a caregiver or something to that effect.
Right,
That I don't know, Eric.
okay. So on a conservative side, if you allowed one person to be there for each of those supportive housing units, would that be a conservative and reasonable approach to that?
I don't know because ARC is located on this site. So they are,
Well, can you repeat the question, Eric? I'm sorry, I heard the answer, but I didn't hear the question.
Okay, the question is, would it be a conservative but appropriate and reasonable approach to say that a lot of times in the supportive housing, you have a staff person who is there, I mean, not the same staff person, but 24/7.
That would not be the case for this site.
So these would be independent.
There would be someone to check on them periodically, but it would
Okay.
not be someone who would be there it's not a 24-hour
Okay.
assisted, not like an assisted living facility where someone else will be living in the unit. It would be someone just to check up and, make sure everything is going well. And if we have them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we've done a number of them, and it varies depending on who that person is who would live in that unit. I just want to make sure that we account for the parking demands associated with the supportive housing.
Right.
So, the EV parking spaces, how did you come up with 41?
Well, the original calculation for the parking demand on the property, I believe came out to 412. So we had allocated approximately 41 EV charging stations throughout the development, because, you have to do 15%. And then we took the credit.
15% of the residential, correct?
Well, 15% of the residential and 4% of the commercial is the way the ordinance reads.
Okay.
So when you factor that all in, we came up with 41. I'll have to check the numbers, but I believe that would be consistent with the ordinance and the state law.
Okay. Does the state law have a limitation on how much of a credit you can get based on what the required parking is?
Yeah, 10% of the required number of parking
Right.
spaces.
So with your current calculation, you have a total of 386. So
But
10% would,
that's after the credit.
oh,
So-
that's after the credit?
That's after the credit,
Oh.
I believe. That's what we came up with.
Okay, all right. That wasn't clear to me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So can you go back to Exhibit A9, the parking allocation? Mr. LaParry, thank you for pointing out that there was yellow on there. I found it very difficult to see that from up here. I'm just saying, I'm glad the blue was easy to see, the yellow, not so much.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, this is Exhibit A9.
Okay. So is it correct that the two existing residential buildings, that they already have reserved parking of one space for each unit?
I forget if the landlord has done that, whether or not they're reserved spaces or assigned spaces. I'd have to check with my client. But this is the 264 residential building, and this is what we call Building 6A. And then this is the new building. So I'm not sure if
Okay.
they actually, in their leases, have assigned one parking spot to each tenant, and then the rest are, whatever's available.
Because reading the resolution for 264, it did say there was one space reserved for each
Okay.
unit, which you can't share that space because it's
Correct.
assigned and reserved. I did not see that for Building 6A. So I was curious about that. Now, the entrance to the senior building, the lobby access is actually on the south side of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in that building, there are 39 units total minus the 4 supportive, so there's 35 units
Correct.
in that building. And how many garages are there?
I believe there's 12.
12. So that would leave 23 spaces to provide one space for each of the residents. Just
Agreed.
not saying they're reserved or anything.
Right.
Where would those other 23 spaces be
Yeah.
located?
You'd have the ability to park across the back, across the east side, the west side of the driveway that's between 6 and the new building, as well as some spaces in front of the Karloff's building, and then there's one handicap space right in front of the senior house.
Okay. Now, those, however many spaces there are in front of the Carlos building, wouldn't they be used by the offices in that building?
Well, we had earmarked the yellow spaces here as well as some of the spaces alongside, because there's various entry points into the building. And then you also have the ability to put some of the employees towards the back.
Okay, now, some of the spaces in the back that you've highlighted in blue, those are grass paver spaces,
That's
correct?
correct.
Is it, in your opinion, is that a suitable parking space to be set aside for a senior, 55 and over, in inclement weather, when there's snow?
I don't believe that would be an issue, because what we've actually seen on these paver-type situations, actually the snow tends to melt more quickly in those gravel and grass areas, and we actually see that it's not an issue. You're talking about 55 and older. I'm gonna be 74, so I can definitely handle that. So I don't see it as a problem.
Well, I'm 75 and I can't handle it. Yeah, I'll tell you now.
Mike, now you also mentioned the spaces on the west side of the proposed building, but aren't those, you have 39 non-age restricted units in building 6A.
Correct.
And how many spaces are under the building? I know, I'm picking on you.
8, 16, 20, 31 spaces immediately under the building.
Okay. So there would still be a need for additional parking to provide one space for every one of the units in that building.
Well, we have 21 spaces along here. You're looking at another 7 here, that's 28, 29. You're looking at another, excuse me, 12 spaces in the back. So, when you look at the whole area, we felt we had more than enough parking for those tenants. Excuse me.
Okay. But then you also, the ones behind the Karloff's building, you've noted as being electric. If you don't have an electric car, then you're not supposed to be parking in those. So is,
The way things are going, more and more people have electric cars, so any of the tenants that live in those two buildings could park and into close proximity to the building.
Is only one handicap space required?
No, there's handicap spaces scattered throughout. There just happens to be one in front of the building there.
that's all I have for Mike.
Any other questions for the engineer? Go ahead.
Just for engineering, so, in terms of allocation, with the prior applications with the zoning board, they essentially determined what that allocation is in the aggregate. They said 331 spaces, which includes the variance relief, for all the uses that exist today, right? And so this application proposes 39 units and a net increase of 18 physical parking spaces. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, it would seem to be that there's either a deficiency in the number of parking for the new units, or we're now impacting the zoning board's approval for the 331 units, because those 39 units, even at a ratio of 1-to-1, will have to use some of those 331 spaces that were allocated by the zoning board. So I guess it's a question of which is it, because we're not designating spaces for the residential uses. I know we're talking about shared, but it's one way or the other, and I think you guys need to take a stance.
I don't know if I can quite follow where you were going
So-
with that.
Zoning board approval for all that exists today. Total of 331 spaces. That's the current allocation for all of the uses that exist. You're adding a new building with 39 residential units but you're only increasing the total site parking count to 349 spaces. That's an increase of 18 spaces. So either you have 18 spaces for those new 39 units, or those 39 units start to eat into the 331 from the zoning board approval. So it's one way or the other, and you guys should maybe tell the board how they should think about that.
Well, that's why we have a traffic consultant that is gonna testify about how the site is actually functioning, what the demand actually is.
Right. But from an allocation numerical standpoint, that's
If
accurate.
you're just crunching numbers, you're absolutely correct.
The question was raised in terms of the EV parking count, whether or not they can now get credits for the whole, totality of the parking requirement of 412 parking spaces. I'm not the expert on that, I'll leave it to the experts, but the way I think you could look at it is, I don't know if the board could then require EV for the totality of the parking. So I think it's fair of you to propose that, but again, now we're taking away from the parking from the prior zoning board approval, from a functional standpoint. And would the zoning board have considered that when they reviewed that application? I think that's one thought.
Yeah, and as I've said from day one, I think the goal is to try to identify, number one, do we in fact need variance? We don't feel we do, but as you're pointing out, there could be that issue where we do need a variance for parking. And we feel strongly that we have, if Mr. Dean could get up and testify, you would hear that we believe we have the numbers that prove out our contention that even if we do need a variance, it's supportable. And it falls under the C2 criteria that produces a good project, provides housing that's needed, especially for seniors.
Right, but
I think when we get to the end, hopefully by that time, we'll all be in agreement.
Right, but it's your testimony that the prior parking variance that the zoning board granted should apply to this and the
That's our
total
opinion.
parking? And that's why we shouldn't provide an adequate number of senior housing parking spaces? So meaning that 18 parking
But we
spaces
feel
is
we own
sufficient?
it. That's the
Okay.
quandary we're in.
All right, well, you have to decide, are you asking for a variance for the senior parking, or are you impacting the zoning board application?
So let me
That's a stance,
try to
yeah.
shed some clarification on this, because we don't believe we need a variance for this site, and I'll tell you why. Is because, number one, we showed this matrix that Mr. Lanzafama has provided that says 386 are required and 385 are required, 386 are provided. That's number one. Number two is the Fairfield Code, section 45-19.1A states that whenever there is more than one use conducted on any one premises, parking shall be provided in accordance with the combined requirements of each use as shown in the above schedule, which we showed.
Right.
Unless it can be demonstrated through a parking generation analysis prepared by a qualified traffic engineer that the peak parking demand is less than the total number of spaces required by ordinance.
Right.
And that's where we came and we provided extensive testimony. We did studies, counts by Mr. Dean. He spoke to it at length at the last hearing. Our planner also commented on it. He will get up here in a few moments and speak to it again.
But wouldn't that information necessarily change the facts from the zoning board application?
It was a mixed.
You can
use development, then
justify
we
a
just didn't need
reduction.
it. They provided us a variance, so we didn't need to justify the mixed-use spaces. We could have, but we obtained the variance.
We'll leave that for now. I understand we're trying to get to traffic, but before we do, our office did prepare a memo dated January 4th, and I understand, the major topic for tonight was parking and traffic. We have a number of comments that have gone unanswered so far pertaining to landscaping, signage, et cetera. So I guess the question is, at what point can we have answers to some of these outstanding questions?
Yeah, and we sat up here last time for a couple hours, and
Right.
we presented our case. We opened it up to questions from anyone, including, I guess you're from Joe Burgess's office.
That's right.
Mr. Zabo sat up here, he asked us all the questions, Mr. Burry asked us questions, the members of the board asked us all the questions, and we answered every question that was asked of us. We went through the site plan, we provided all of our professionals, and there was an opportunity for anybody to ask any specific questions at that point in time. The only reason we didn't conclude at the last hearing
Right.
was because they raised some issues and said that because of the nature of the site, the board wasn't confident with some of our traffic counts because of a discrepancy on when we took the counts in October, and that the board wanted to have the benefit of retaining an additional expert in order to review our traffic counts. So that was the purpose that we were told that we needed to come back and extend this hearing to, this application to another hearing.
I hear that. My understanding is that there were other unresolved issues, again, pertaining to landscaping, for example. I'll defer to the board if you feel that you've had adequate testimony. I won't, beat a dead horse.
I'd like to hear it
I
again.
I have your memo dated January 4th, 2024.
Uh,
Are you referring
yeah.
to, what is it, page?
Well, we have a number of comments. I would say beginning on page 6, right? And if you've addressed them, feel free to say acknowledged. If you haven't, I think you need to respond to them.
Yeah, I believe we had said that we would adhere to whatever requirements were in here.
Yep.
But we thought we had addressed all of these, even prior to coming to the meeting.
How many comments are on there?
Mr. LaParry, can you have him pull his microphone over?
It's, item 1, A through F, item 2, signage, all of the letters said, oh, I'm sorry. The applicant should confirm that there are no changes to the previously approved sign plan. That's the case, there are no changes. Lighting design of the poles and pole heights are consistent with fixtures previously approved in prior applications. We defer to the township engineer as to compliance with township lighting standards as to illumination levels. I believe that everything that's been installed was consistent with the approved plans. The landscaping items, we could go through this, but I believe that we have in fact gone above and beyond what was shown on our landscaping plans and provided even more landscaping. And if we need to add some details to the landscaping plan with regard to spacing and material call-out, we'll be happy to do
Well,
that.
again, the question is, is your testimony that you're going to comply with all these conditions?
Yes.
Okay, so being that you've updated the plans already, I guess you've had this since January 4th, is there a reason that you didn't update them so we could see that? I don't mean
To
that
be
as
honest
a
with you, I
gotcha.
thought all these items were addressed, and there was no necessity to modify the plan. But I'll go through them item by item with my staff and our landscape architect, and we'll make it whatever adjustments are necessary, and we'll submit plans more than 10 days prior to the next hearing, and they'll be complete. I've made copious notes this time, instead of just going from memory and forgetting stuff. So we're gonna make sure that we get you all the information you need in due time so that you can review it and understand it and be fully informed.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions for the engineer? Thank you, Mike.
Do we want to open it up to the public real quick?
Anybody, any questions from the public? Seeing no one, close to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
My next witness is our traffic engineer, Gary Dean. Gary Dean testified at the last hearing. He was sworn under oath. He will acknowledge, you acknowledge that you're still under oath, Mr. Dean.
Yes, I understand that. Good evening.
So maybe you received Mr. Keller's memorandum, and the board had some questions regarding our traffic counts. Can you please share with the board some of the additional information and findings and any other updates from the last hearing?
Certainly. The board may recall that a question was raised at our March 12th appearance, whether when we had done our parking lot counts in October, whether the center was fully leased. And in consultation with the applicant, I confirmed that it had been fully leased. The question then arose as to whether it was occupied or not, and I understand that Mr. King has submitted correspondence to the board where he elected to clarify that. And candidly, it was news to me, the ARC space in question had not received its certificate of occupancy at the time we did our counts. However, the building was filled with contractors who were fitting out the space in anticipation of that permanent occupancy. So the space was occupied at the time we did our counts. However, as an added measure, or test, we went back out to the site on Thursday, April 4th of this year, which, as it turns out, I think is just a few days prior to when Mr. Keller conducted his counts. And at that time, we found a very similar finding to our October data, where we had a peak parking demand at 10:30 in the morning of 154 parked vehicles and 203 empty spaces. So it essentially confirmed our original findings. And I want to clarify, principally for Mr. Keller's benefit, that the way we conducted, I mentioned we flew a drone, but we didn't continuously leave the drone up there. We flew it, took a picture. It allowed us to come back to the office and count the number of occupied spaces. However, the individual piloting the drone went under the buildings and counted all of the spaces that we couldn't see from the air. So I just want to clarify that. But I think I can make this a simpler exercise based on what Eric found. And that is, he went out, I believe it was the 8th of April, which was a Tuesday. I don't believe there was anything unusual going on in the center. And he found slightly higher counts. And that's okay. We can work with that. And we'll say it was 200 spaces, just to make the math easy. And that's your consultant's findings. 200 parked cars. That means there were roughly 130 empty spaces still. And if we took this new building and dropped it on the site and assumed that, notwithstanding the fact that some of them are to be restricted for their use, but we assume they all need 2 spaces for every unit, add 78 spaces to the 200 that the site already needs. The site needs 278 spaces, and we have 349. And that's without credits for EV and all of those other things. So it verifies my findings. Eric's work does the same, that this site has plenty of parking to support the use. Now, I understand there are some questions about the grass paver spaces and the location and how far does one have to carry groceries. And I understand that. I can also acknowledge that, if I parked in not even the back row of this lot, it's a longer walk to come inside this building than it is to virtually anywhere on this campus. So the walking distance, we can start to discuss that, but in terms of, is it too far, is it close enough, I would submit as a professional engineer and looking at design parameters that when residents are home, and again, the commercial tenants have vacated for the day, that there is parking that can support this use. And that's with not even discussing things like on Kingbridge Road, and it's a question actually I have for Eric, but, and I know that's out of protocol here, but I don't know, for example, if his counts included the parked cars on Kingbridge Road. Ours did not. But we also know that there are 18 spaces, albeit limited to a certain time, but they can be used by visitors and guests to anyone coming to these residential buildings. So we can't ignore the fact that they exist. We're not including them in our counts, but from a practical perspective, who else is going to use those spaces but the tenants within this overall center? So that is as brief and succinct as I can summarize. And I know, again, there were some questions about the discrepancy in floor area. I trust that's been reconciled. I'll leave it to Eric to address that. But there is no need to increase the calculations. And again, I just want to reinforce, ordinances are nice when we don't have empirical data. And now over the course of roughly 6 months, we have a lot of data. And it says somewhere between 150 and 200 spaces is what this center needs to support the tenants that are in there. And again, to reiterate, even if we add the parking from the new building directly on top of that, forget about sharing it, we still have a surplus of in excess of 70 spaces. So that is all I have in the way of additional testimony, unless there are specific questions. I know, Mr. Chairman, you had some concerns about the truck circulation, and I know Mr. Lanza-Fama will address that. But his representation is consistent with my original testimony, which is to fight a fire, trucks don't park next to buildings that are involved. They want to be far enough away so that personnel aren't in any way endangered, nor is the equipment. And so using the outer road that leads to the Kingsley building behind this site, which is 24 feet in width, is the appropriate staging area. But I understand your concerns, and we will look forward to addressing that to your fire personnel's satisfaction.
If you have an abundance worth of parking spots, you could lose those spots, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so.
I mean, you have an ordinance, and again, you know, we're discussing real world versus, you know, make-believe. And I know Mr. Sabo at the last hearing indicated that there this may be the catalyst to revisit your parking standards for various commercial uses. We're not there, so we're just identifying that, you know, the simple question is, does this site have enough parking? The answer conclusively is yes, whether it's Eric's work or my work. So that's all I have, board members, unless you have specific questions.
I have a question.
Certainly.
If you have enough designated parking spaces for the day and in the evening, would it be possible to do designated parking spaces specifically for at least the residential owners or the tenants? And then it won't be confusing. It's very confusing, like where this one's parking, where that one's parking, when they're coming in, when they're coming out. Wouldn't it be simple if you could designate specific spots for all the residential use?
I agree, yes. And that's been done for the prior two buildings. I understand every resident has one assigned space. And you know, those spaces can't be considered quote-unquote shared, not that we need them to be. But I happen to agree with you. When you get into this blend of residential in commercial settings, whether it's a shopping center or an office building, what have you, it addresses the concern of what happens on President's Day, right, where many people don't work. This one's a little different in that this is a senior building, and so one, what do they call it, age restricted. We've assumed that we don't have everyone, let's say, leaving to go to work during the day, that because they're seniors, partly retired, what have you, that they would be there during the day. That's why I say we can take the 200 demand today, drop in 78 from this new building, and we still have plenty of parking. But I think it would be prudent, and again, because of the request to submit revised plans, they should reflect some assigned spaces. It's a little different with this building because we do have 11 garages, which will be assigned. So we need to pick up 28 more assigned spaces, one per unit, and we will distribute those accordingly. But I think that's a fair.
When they're designated, are they designated with a plate saying the apartment number or the name of the person? How is it designated?
Usually,
I'm designated number 2, but I come in and someone's parking in number 2. They don't know. There's no sign there.
Sure.
So how do you know it's designated for a specific person?
It's usually painted on the pavement with number, and it'll say reserved 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So as a tenant, you're in unit 5, you get reserved space 5, and it corresponds to your unit number.
Did you also take into account that people they work from home more often than in the past?
And that's why with the contemporary counts that we've done, yes, I mean, ever since the pandemic, we know that people have enjoyed, some people call it a sentence, but others call it a luxury in that, you know, they can work from home. But yes, that's why, you know, years ago, we'd assumed the place would vacate during the day and the office workers could take it. Between seniors, which we expect would be home, and work from home in the other two buildings, that's why we got post-pandemic, you know, contemporary data. But I think assigning them is the only way that this practically works.
I have a question. With regard to the spaces, how many spaces are on that property?
Overall?
Yes.
I
357.
Yeah, I mean, there's credits and, you know, physical spaces. I'd like to have Mike answer the question only because there's been numbers, there's been a few added. I don't know that I have the final number, but I believe it was 349.
And do you have the breakdown of handicap, EV?
I do. They're on the plans. They're also on Mr. Lanzafama's chart that was just submitted. I don't have the current one, but I believe those are also broken out. Yeah. I know, I saw them. Oh, yes, thank you. So on the site plan sheet, that's an exhibit. I'll just refer to drawing number 4, which is entitled Overall Site Plan. There is a breakdown under, it's called breakdown of parking provided. Under proposed, it lists standard spaces, handicap spaces, and handicap does include some EV spaces under the regulations, and then straight EV spaces, and then garage spaces. So that tabulation is included on the plan set you have.
And the, under the building parking, we take that out from the shared parking calculation.
It's assigned to the individuals. Our shared parking and the matrix that Mr. Lanzafama prepared does delineate those separately, so they're not, I'll say, in the shared pool, if you will. But again, I'm trying to move away from the theoretical and focus on the practical, which is, and again, just to make the math easy, we have 200, this site needs 200 spaces for what's there today, ignore whatever else. So it's overbuilt, and that's why there was a receptiveness, among other reasons, to use grass pavers, so.
And you were the expert on various other.
Correct.
Zoning board, I think there was 2 or 3 zoning board. Do you recall bank parking?
Not specifically, I'm
Is
sorry.
there any bank parking on any of the plans?
I don't believe this features that, and I think in lieu of banked parking, and I couldn't tell you which board it was, the desire was to go with the grass pavers so that it didn't go through the zoning officer, your engineer, or the client, the applicant or owner says, hey, I need more parking, and then we go through construction permits. It was put them in and make them grass.
So you recall there were bank parking?
Well, I wouldn't call them banked. I would call them the permeable or the grass paved systems.
They
I
were
don't.
bank parking or the paved parking?
Yeah, I don't think there's a bank. To me means an area designated for future parking if and when it's needed to be constructed at the discretion of any one of the people I just mentioned, your engineer, zoning officer, the applicant.
And is there any bank parking on this plot?
Not to my knowledge, no.
If a zoning board resolution required 39 bank parking spaces, was there any relief from the zoning board from that?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm sorry.
And if the planning board required 85 bank parking spaces, do you know if the applicant ever came before the planning board to get relief from that?
When you say relief, what do you mean by relief?
If it was part of the resolution, granting approval of a certain use.
I'm still not understanding the question.
So sometimes you require bank parking, correct? And you went through the reasons why.
Yeah. Banked parking is a land use technique to avoid putting an impervious that there's a collective consensus that it's not needed. Your ordinance says, hey, we need 500 parking spaces, and, through math and consultants and what have you, we all say we only need 250. So sometimes the board will say, give us a plan that shows the 500, but we'll agree to bank them. So when you say banked are needed, I don't know what, I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm trying to understand.
Aren't the bank spaces supposed to be reflective of the plan? Aren't they supposed to be shown on the plan?
Well, no, because they're banked. The area is usually shown.
But when the resolution requires them to be shown on the plan, don't they have to be shown on the plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the traffic expert? Seeing none, I'd like to open up to the public.
Actually, I have one. I'm sorry,
sorry.
Mr. Chairman. And Gary, you've addressed most of the comments I had in my letter and explained that, and thank you for clarifying your original parking count and that you recounted on April 4th. Question I have is, you talked about there are reserved parking spaces. Could can Mr. Lanzafama provide a plan or working with the applicant as to where the reserved parking spaces are today, if there's any that need to be changed because of this proposed building, and where there would be reserved spaces for the senior building, so we can see where they are and make sure that they're not then impacting on the other uses that are on the site.
Sure. I think the easiest way for me is to say yes, because Mike is committed to providing you with an amended plan. And however they've been striped for the two existing buildings, we will all make sure they're shown on the plans properly.
Yeah, I was too busy counting cars to look and see if there was pavement markings on there that said this is reserved. I was trying not to drive into somebody while I counted cars.
But yes, we will provide that.
So, and that's all I have. I think Dave.
Any other questions from the board?
What happened, and this may be a stupid question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. If I live in an apartment, I have an assigned spot, and then all of a sudden I get an electric car, do I surrender my existing assigned spot and get reassigned an electric spot? Or do I now have two spots that I'm tying up? Because one's assigned to me, but I have a need to be in an EV spot.
Great question. I don't want to shoot from the hip because that comes down to sort of building and property management as opposed to this process. But yeah, I think as EV adoption, whether it continues on the trend it has or whether it plateaus or who knows, a very practical question. So let us get you that answer. But my expectation is a few things could happen. The owner may elect to keep the tenant in their spot and just put the equipment in so that they can charge it and then call that an EV space. Alternatively, and that may be nice if you're parked under the building, because many of the EV spaces are outside. That's a mechanical issue, but it's a good one, and we will get you that.
In the condominium world, there's a requirement that if an owner of a condominium requests one from the association, that the association has to assist and accommodate the request to relocate the equipment. I don't believe that's the case with the rental property, but it doesn't mean it can't be done, and it's probably the most practical solution.
So you would take one of the 42 spots
But
that,
we would add, we would relocate.
potentially,
We would provide you with,
you would just put another charging unit in that assigned spot
or
under
in
the
a
building.
reasonably close place if it couldn't be done because it was under a building or something like that, something that would be reasonable to accommodate the request.
Just for the record, we can't put them underneath the building. They
That's,
have-
that's
they
why I
have
said
to-
reasonable, because of that concern, exactly.
I want to get clarification on that because I believe some are proposed under the building.
Well, Steve, we have to check that.
I think we removed those.
Yeah, I may not have a current plan, but thank you for,
Yeah, the initial plan may have, but that,
We removed those.
okay,
yeah,
Yeah.
because that would be a variance.
thank you. So that may answer your question, which is the EV spaces can't be under the building. So that resident, if they get a new vehicle that's EV, they'll be reassigned to another spot, and that opens it up for the leasing office to reassign that space.
Providing they were assigned a space under the building.
Correct.
The garages that are under the building, how would you propose stopping somebody from using it for storage as opposed to parking and not just taking another parking spot outside?
When you say storage, you mean like lawn furniture or?
Furniture, I mean, I've seen people, furniture, bicycles.
I've seen that be more of a problem in, say, townhouse developments where there are garages and people, fill it with other things. In this instance, there's management overseeing this entire premises. So if there's for lack of a better term, a bunch of stuff in a parking space, that'll get raised and
So in the
immediately.
calculation, the garages aren't counted in the calculation of parking spots?
Oh, yeah, they're
Yeah,
counted, sure.
so I meant inside the garage. If I was a tenant and I was a person that liked to save a lot of things, and you see this, and I started using my garage for storage and then using a spot outside for my car.
Sure.
How would you prevent that?
I guess the most practical way is to just have it in the lease, to say, if you're choosing, and because there's a shortage and I'll have to consult with the applicant, sometimes those come with a premium, right? If you have a garage space, you know, that's a slightly more expensive unit to rent. Well, if you're renting it for the benefit of a garage, why fill it up with stuff? But that's usually how it's done.
It's something we would put in the lease, and we could even make that a condition, is we would make sure that it's in every lease. That's kind of standard for us.
Within the building, is there any arrangements for people to store things?
Yeah.
Bicycles,
Our
Christmas decorations?
Our architect isn't here. He went through the floor plans at the last hearing. I didn't pay attention enough to know exactly where the closets and storage are. We don't have him here tonight, but I'm sure it's commensurate with the size of the unit is the amount of storage that's provided. I mean, they're nice units.
Yeah, okay.
We will get you the answer to that, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions tonight?
Thank you for your time again.
Anybody from the public like to be heard? Seeing no one, close the public.
I just have one question of our traffic expert. With regard to the ordinances, there's two ordinances that require bank parking. Is it?
Two resolutions.
Resolutions, I'm sorry.
Correct.
They were with the approvals, and they're supposed to be shown on the mat. Is that something that's important, or is it, it's not important?
Well, I mean, at the time, there was a provision, what those plans were. I was not involved in either of those applications. I think what Mr. Dean was trying to say, the question was, you provide bank parking and you show it on a plan. I mean, looking at the plan that is before us, whatever might have been identified as bank parking appears to have been built, or is no longer available because there's a building on it. But, where that bank parking, might have been, Mr. Lanzafama has been involved in this project since the get-go. He could probably identify where that bank parking that was referenced in the planning board, I think it was a planning board application and a zoning board application, where those bank parking spaces were, and if they have been built or if those spaces are no longer available because there's a building there now, that should be able to be identified.
If they were built in the resolution, they require to come back to the board for approval of those.
The zoning board application was silent on what the mechanism was to build those spaces. The planning board application was clear, is that the applicant was to return to the board to seek, even though they were approved, they had to come back to the board to actually construct them. Whether and I went through the various resolutions, I was looking more for parking numbers and things like that. There may have been, I don't know if it was in one of the, 8 different resolutions that there are for this property. I don't know if it was included in there. Again, Mr. Lanzafama might be the best person, since he has the most continuous knowledge of that, is to identify if and when they came back to this board for building those 85 bank spaces, or, where they may be now.
And the requirement of the bank spaces that the zoning board had was part of the D variance for the use of the loft.
Correct.
Would that still have to run with the property, that there has to be banked spots?
Well, unless they were actually constructed. I think that's the point, is where were those, when the zoning board approved 39 bank spaces, where were they shown on the plan, and have they now built them? Or, again, are they in an area that they can no longer be built upon because there's a residential building or some other building where they were supposed to be provided?
If you look at A5, the parking demand calculation, With regard to the, I guess it's the amenity space, or the mezzanine space,
Right.
is there 80, what, 80, was it 89? I'm sorry, 39 spaces utilized there?
No, I mean, if you look at both the car loft and the mezzanine office space, I mean, combined, those come out to 50 spaces.
So then part of the zoning resolution, shouldn't there be a banked set of spaces?
Or a provision for where those, what were banked are now constructed. And I'd have to look at that resolution more as to what was the basis for asking for 39 bank spaces. Because as Mr. Dean testified, you usually bank spaces because you want to have the right to build them, but you don't think they're needed at that particular time. And if they did build them, then, you know, what was the total parking requirement that was to be set aside for the car lofts application?
So in the future, if there's a problem on this property with regard to parking, would it be good to have identified bank spacing? This doesn't make any sense.
Depends on, I mean, it depends on what uses are, you know, in this, I think it was the chairman who asked this question. Well, that's, you know, the parking demand is based on what's on site today. You know, the commercial space can be changed. I mean, the what is it called? The Stepping Stone School, that wasn't there. That has, and I don't know if Fairfield has a change of tenancy or a site plan requirement where where an applicant comes in with a more, with a use that has a more intensive parking requirement, that they have to come before the board to show that the parking would still be sufficient. Since they're asking for a variance, and I'm not gonna play attorney, if they're coming in for a variance for parking, is whether that's a reasonable stipulation, a condition that says, you know, you can't convert warehouse space or other lower intensity parking demand areas into something that has a higher demand without returning to this board, even though it is a permitted use. So because of the parking, and you're asking for a variance.
So those boards that passed those resolutions, they looked at everything and they made a determination that there should be banked spaces for those uses.
Based upon what existed and what was proposed at that point in time. That's one thing with parking, is that it's dynamic. It changes with time.
So with regard to the loft space, and we had that discussion, that the zoning board's resolution would be what we'd be guided by. It requires those 39 spaces. Is that still required to this day, or it's the same use? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, without further analysis, I can't answer that, Mr. King. I don't know.
But the board who required it and granted the D-variance contingent upon that thought it was important.
Based on the facts before them, yes.
As well as the planning board did with regard to their bank spaces.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Keller, you weren't a party to any of those applications, right?
I was not. The only one I was party to was the one where the car lofts came in and they received a denial for
Okay,
their
so-
application.
So you don't know what the planning board or zoning board were thinking when they hit this hypothetical bank parking that we're talking about that no one really wants to tell us what it is. You weren't a party to any of that, right?
I was not.
Okay.
Well, council, it's in resolutions.
Well, can you identify it
Sure.
rather
It's
than?
in resolution 716, paragraph 11 of the requirements. I mean, I can read it into the record.
I'm not clear which resolution it is. There's a bunch of them.
It is a planning board resolution.
Planning
It's
board.
from December 13th, 2016. As agreed to by the applicant shall remove and bank 85 proposed parking spaces along the south and southwest boundaries of the subject property and maintain a grassed area with flush Belgian block curbing. Although these parking spaces are approved by the board, they will not be constructed at present. The 85 park spaces shall be shown on the approved plans. However, in the event that the applicant seeks to build and utilize these 85 parking spaces, they shall return to the board for approval or review. I'm just trying to chase that down, because I haven't seen anything that your applicant came back to use.
Okay, because we all understand bank parking to me is we're not gonna build it because we don't need it, so we're just gonna be grass with a designated area that's located someplace else. And if we need it in the future because we're having some trouble with parking, that's the spot to go to add the parking. This was a 2016 resolution of the planning board. We know that there's been several approvals since then. And every board, as far as Mr. Burry could probably confirm this, every set of plans that and after every set of approvals we've gotten have been signed off by Mr. Burry and the board chairman as to, each appropriate board. So I'm confident they've all been reviewed and signed off on by whomever had to do
That's why I
that.
was just concerned I didn't see them on the current.
Well-
Also in the zoning board's approval, June 18th, 2019, this one's a little bit thin. It just says applicant shall create a bank of 39 parking spaces for installation as needed. And that's for the use of the amenity space, which is important, because if that, I think what occurred is you went from 40 to 99 cars there, and if the membership grows, it kind of makes sense that you would probably want that ability to have parking for it.
Well, we would need to go back to the board and then they would just tell us no because we don't have sufficient parking if that were the issue. We'd have to go back for an amended approval at the zoning board regardless if we wanted to grow that use, because right now we have a restriction. So we couldn't do that unless we went back to the zoning board. We wouldn't be allowed to do that.
But that's why I'm just saying it shouldn't be somewhere on your plans, that you have these banks.
Have them available.
Yeah, please do.
Mr. King, on sheet number 4, the overall site plan, there's a table that enumerates the number of parking spaces, whether they're standard, banked, electric, handicapped, and it gives you the different approvals. So I believe the second approval had 85 banked parking spots, and then the third approval had 0. When we made that application, if my memory's correct, we got approval to install the 85 banked parking spots, which are located all along the south side of the property, which are the grass paver parking areas. That was the bank spaces.
Okay, so then you're utilizing those 85 bank spaces?
Yes, we're now utilizing them. But I believe between that second approval and the third approval, we got the okay to put those in. But yeah, we'd have to go back and look at the
And
resolution.
with regard to the zoning board, 39 for that loft space?
I think that was all constructed. We ended up, instead of banking all the spots, we ended up building them.
So would that 39 be on top of the 331, or was it baked in to the 331?
I think the 39 were baked into the 85.
The site,
Just baked.
the total parking count.
Banked parking we're talking about.
Right, the zoning board gave a variance, which yielded a total site parking count of 331 spaces. Were the 39 spaces that were banked and then constructed on top of the 331, or were they part of the 331?
I don't recall, I'd have to look.
Mr. Lonzafama, and that, your table has prior approval 1 through 6. Is there any place where you list what each of those applications was?
I'd have to go back, Eric,
Okay.
and what, obviously, we had the small warehouse addition on Building 6, then we had 264, then we had a self-storage building approved, the warehouse building approved, and each approval changed, obviously. So
But there's nothing that.
I could
that
add that,
Okay.
perhaps, maybe find the resolution number that coincides with that approval and add that to the plan. That might be helpful
And not
for
all of them were
everybody.
necessarily built.
Say again?
Not everything that was approved was ever built,
That's
so.
correct.
Right. I think that would be
But it might be
helpful.
helpful to track
Yeah.
Yeah.
the sequences
Yeah.
of what happened.
Because looking at,
On somebody looking for something on the plan that wasn't ever built, even though it was approved.
like the self-storage building.
Yes.
I mean, because looking at the table, you know, and every one of the scenarios, including the current one, has a different total parking supply provided.
Correct.
So, okay.
Any other questions from the board? Any other questions from the audience or the public?
Are you closing your application?
I'd like to take a 5-minute recess if I could.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you.
Wait, are we going to recess? Okay. Right now, just so everybody knows, with this system, I'm not so sure if I can turn down YouTube a little bit, but keep it in your mind, I'm not quite sure. So, I'm not sure what we're picking up.
Minimal existence, you don't need that very much. And that's what it is. Canadians are perfect. Down in Florida, in the summer, in the winter, come back to Canada. But you see, you live, you don't live in the boat, you live on the boat. So what happens, you spend a great deal of time outside. Or on the dock, so it's a lifestyle. Yeah, I'm an ocean fisherman. I belong to a fly club. I am without doubt the worst fly fisherman on the face of the earth. First of all, my hands, I can't close them, so I can't hand 2 minutes. But to begin with, that happened. Because that's when I had trouble dealing with buddies like that. Never mind the water.
Where's the complaint box? I gotta throw my complaints in.
There's a guy, a multi-millionaire guy, fishes all around the world. I can't remember the name, but he has about 3 or 4 boats in various spots all over. And he schleps the same fruit with around the world. And you talk about possessed. I have 4 boats, each of them worth $1 million around the world. Yes, but you go there on his jet. So you have to understand the wealth. But you, a 40-foot sailboat is Atlantic Ocean. Let's see, a 40-foot sailboat is because it has no motors. And when you go down below, you they're 40 feet. The graduates may only be about 8, 9 feet wide, 10 feet wide. It's a lot of room. If you carry 100 gallons of diesel, you'll be surprised at how much water you have. You do 6 knots, you make it. Yeah, well, this one's fast. The other one burned 55 gallons of fuel. This one burns, and it was doing 23 knots. This will do about 25 knots. Maybe 18 knots.
You deserve it. You gotta enjoy yourself a little bit.
Guys, the mics might be on.
Yep. I'm gonna, well, just let me, I'm gonna clean this up. Gonna get, oh, they're gonna move? Okay, go ahead.
They're gonna ask to.
Okay.
Back in session 9:13, we're going to call up Atlantic Group LLC. We're going to have a motion to carry for May 29th.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Shepis. I'm the applicant's attorney, and we note that you have other items on the agenda this evening before us, noting that the hour is 9:15, and I heard the announcement you would not take further testimony after 11. Even if we start, I don't think we would finish. So I think it's more prudent at this hour that we ask the matter be carried. I ask the notice be preserved, and we'd ask to be heard at your May 29th, 2024 meeting at 7 p.m.
So extend it to the May 30th?
Yeah, I
With no
consent to
further
an extension of time for the board to act, say, June 30th, 2024.
Thank you.
You have a motion to,
You said June?
No.
No, he said.
Just the extension, the extension.
May 29th.
May 29th.
Yes.
we have a motion.
Motion to move.
Second.
Mayor Galais.
Aye.
Councilman LaForte.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Pareno.
Aye.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Capone.
Okay, thank you for your courtesy. Have a good evening. Thanks.
So, where we left off, we had our professionals go, as the Chairman Cafone had indicated, to be early in the night. The board needs more time to review some of the information we provided today. And as your planner and your traffic engineer had requested, they need some revisions from our professionals in order to present or clarify some landscaping issues and some parking issues. So we will do that with the hope that we could probably take a half hour at the next hearing and go over those changes to the landscaping and other issues with parking, and then hopefully get a vote at that point in time.
So we'd like to carry this to May 29th.
Is that the next hearing, not the 14th?
14th, we have many members are not available, unfortunately, so we'd be prudent to, I don't think we would even have a quorum for the 14th, so we'd like to move it to the 29th. That's why the other applicant was going to the 29th also.
Well, if that's the next available hearing, then I'll have to take it. If there's no hearing on the 14th. Is there no schedule for the 14th? There's not going to be no agenda?
Steve, we don't have anything scheduled for the 14th as of yet, correct?
As of yet, no.
And
And like I said, I know I won't be
I know
available.
you're not available.
And
I
there
know
are several
traffic-
others, our
Traffic
traffic.
actor is not available. So we were gonna carry our next meeting to the 29th and cancel the 14th.
Let's see if I'm available.
That's a Wednesday. That's our workshop night.
They also have to go over the review for the fire department.
Yeah, yeah, we'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Right, that's our biggest concern, is to make sure that we can try to address that the best we can before the
Yeah, that's
next hearing. Obviously, I don't think the landscaping issues are as big as the fire department concern. Counselor, is there any other issues with this bank parking you'd like me to look into?
I mean, I'm just concerned, you have resolutions that require it to be on the plan, and they're not. And it may be that there's something I'm missing.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, so can we have a motion to carry this to the 29th?
Make a motion to move, carry it?
With no further notice, correct?
Right, we asked that you carry the notice and we'll provide an extension to the date.
I'll second.
Mayor Galais.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Moreno.
Aye.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Cafone.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under new business, our next applicant is 5-2023 Fairfield Land LLC and Fairfield Land LLC 2. That is 635 and 643 Route 46, Block 3001, Lot 10 and 12. Good night.
Good seeing you.
Take care.
Good night. Good seeing you.
Just give me a minute.
I've waited since August. I could wait
I
another
apologize
couple
to
more
everyone
minutes.
here. What's that?
Ready?
Ready?
What do you think the chances are of me putting this through in one night? I have done it multiple times before. This is a relatively simple theoretical it's a Starbucks and a Raising Cane. Everybody wants a Starbucks. Let's put our order in now. And Raising Cane is the new chicken finger player coming up into the Northeast. This will be its first foray into the Northeast. They have 3 facilities down south right now, but they're pretty well in the rest of the United States. But be that as it may, gentlemen and lady, my name is Frank DeVito. It's good to be back here. It's been a while. I've gotten older. I think some of us, all of us have maybe. No, maybe not. Yeah. I notice I have. I'm cane bound these days, so. In any event, this is a simple, it's a 3.22 acre site on 46 West. It has a previous restaurant on it. It's 2 lots with 1 restaurant, and 1 restaurant on 1 lot, and the rest of it's a parking lot. What's happening now is we're gonna put 2 simple restaurants on it. Each of them one about 2,875 square, the other one about 2,862 square. Your people, your consultants have done a very thorough job. They appropriately beat us up, and we've responded appropriately. I think that we've satisfied everything. I'm pretty confident, that's the kiss of death. I'm pretty confident that my engineer and my planner can go through this in less than an hour. And I think that you'd be satisfied with what you hear. We have all of our approvals in place other than yours. Picky. Okay, so let's see what we can accomplish. With that, I would like to call my trusty engineer, Tom Postley.
So raise your right hand. You swear a firm testimony you're about to give before the board is true self you got?
I do.
And for the record, the state and spell your name.
Thomas F. Pugsley Jr., Pugsley.
And you're a licensed engineer?
Yes.
And all your licenses are in effect?
Yes, they are.
And you've been sworn and found to be an expert in other courts and other planning boards and zoning boards in the state of New Jersey?
Yes, I have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The expert's been qualified and sworn.
Peter, so I don't have to volunteer him now. Thank you. That made it quick. Tom, do us a favor and take us on tour.
Okay. I guess to start off, I'm going to just quickly go through the general area, the property, and then the existing conditions. So the property is.
Excuse me, could you just try to keep that microphone as close to you as possible, because they can't hear
Or if you
it.
want, you could slide the easel up to the side of the, a little closer to the table might help out.
Thank you.
close, I'm gonna hit it. All right. Okay, so the subject site that we're looking at is block 3001, lots 10 and 12. It's a total of 3.229 acres in size and is located at 645 Route 46, which is the northeast corner of the intersection of Route 46 and Two Bridges Road. Properties in the HD zone, and to the north is a office complex as well as an athletic facility. To the east is a multi-use building that has a restaurant and some retail uses. To the south is Route 46 with commercial beyond, and to the west is the jug handle to the exit for Route 46 onto Two Bridges Road. So to go through the existing conditions, we're referring to the boundary and topographic survey that was provided as part of our original plan, so I don't know if that needs to be considered an exhibit. You already have a copy of that. But
This is what was
Just so
submitted with
that
the
we're
report.
clear what we're talking about,
so it's
let's mark what you're referencing right now as A1 for the record.
And that was submitted,
Mark it A1 today's date.
and that was submitted with the packet, correct?
Yeah.
And do you want to just say what the sheet number is?
What sheet number is that?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually the boundary and topographic survey prepared by Blue Marsh Associates, dated 7/1/22. And today's date is, it's on the black order.
33.
20.
23.
Okay. So just to quickly run through the existing conditions. The existing property has a existing one-story building that was previously Houlihan's Restaurant that has been abandoned for several years. The overall property, as I previously mentioned, makes up two lots, Lot 10 and Lot 12. Lot 12 has the building as well as some parking, where Lot 10 is predominantly just overflow parking for the prior restaurant. The overall property is compliant with the bulk requirements in the HD zone, with the exception of the impervious coverage. The existing impervious coverage is 74.5%, which is above the 55% that is required by ordinance. When you break that down into the two lots, the Lot 10 is approximately 50.4%, and Lot 12 is about 92%. So Lot 12 is much more developed than Lot 10. There are 212 parking spaces that are 9 by 20 straight parking spaces. This is an existing nonconformity that was provided for the prior development, as 10 by 20 is required by ordinance and hairpin striping. There's an encroachment to the front yard setback. The parking should be about 30 feet off the right-of-way to Route 46, where it is only approximately 16 feet currently. The property has two access points. In the southeast corner, there's a right-in, right-out off of Route 46, which is the main access point, but then there's also a secondary access, a two-way drive aisle that comes in from the adjacent property to the east, that allows two-way circulation into the property. On the adjacent property, there is an existing 30-foot wide access easement that continues further east, which then it meets up with a 50-foot right-of-way that allows access out to Two Bridges Road. The DOT recently had done some improvements out in Route 46, and they replaced the driveway here, and the width of that driveway is approximately 52.65 feet in width, whereas 30 feet is permitted by ordinance, so that is an existing nonconformity as it stands today. The on-site circulation had two-way circulation with the exception of this area immediately southwest of the existing building, which is one-way circulation. And there is a trash enclosure located on the northeast corner of the building in the side yard setback. That's just note that because by ordinance, the trash enclosures are supposed to be in the rear yard, and so under the existing conditions, there was a existing nonconformity for the trash enclosure. The site is located within the floodplain of the Passaic River. The building is on a high point. The property really, there's grades and drains in 3 directions. There's a small portion in the southeast corner that drains over and flow out to 46. There's a small portion in the northeast corner that drains out to the access into the adjacent property, with the remainder of the property draining in the northerly direction, picked up by an existing on-site stormwater conveyance system, which ultimately discharges into Route 46. There's all public utilities are available. Lighting is provided on the property through a series of area lights. The area lights are a combination of old shoebox fixtures or floodlights that are on 45-degree angles, so it's a shooting light all over the place, as well as some Cobra head fixtures that are attached to utility poles. The majority of the site, as you can see, is impervious surfaces, but we do have some greenery and landscape areas. The majority of the on-site pervious areas are grass areas with some trees in some of the landscape islands. There are some landscape, defined landscape beds around the building, but pretty much everything else is grass on site. And then as far as signage, there was one existing wall sign that was located on the southern facade of the existing building, which has been removed. And then there was one ID sign that's located immediately west of the driveway, the right in, right out on Route 46, which was compliant with the ordinance requirements with the exception of the setback. It has a 0 setback. It is right on the property line where 25 feet was required there. So that's just a quick summary of the existing conditions. If anyone has any questions on that, otherwise I'll move on to the proposed improvement.
I think the board's more interested in now finding out what we're gonna do.
Okay, so then this here is,
This here being what? 8/2, today's date.
yeah, so A2 is going to be a colored version of the site plan that was previously submitted to you and has just been colorized to reflect the different surfaces and shows the landscaping.
What's the date
It
of
has
it?
an exhibit date of 4/2/24.
And the last revision?
Well, that was the exhibit date. The drawings on the date on the drawings is Rev 6 with a date of 3/25/24.
All right. Tell this board how beautiful this plan is.
Okay,
They can do with something pleasant tonight.
all right, so the
Can you
proposed.
just, I'm sorry, can you just please pull that microphone closer? They're telling me they can't be heard at
Still not,
home.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, is that better? Where
Yeah,
it's coming from?
I hope so.
That's better? All right. So for the proposed improvements, we're proposing a Starbucks, approximately 2,175 square feet, as well as a proposed Raising Cane's with a square footage of 2,862 square feet. Both of these uses have drive-throughs associated with them. A little bit of the operations for Starbucks. The hours of operations are going to be Monday through Saturday from 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. and on Sunday from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. There will be approximately 20 to 25 employees, and on a peak shift, there'd be 5 to 8 employees, and there'd be up to 3 shifts. For Raising Cane's, their hours are going to be Sunday through Thursday from 9:30 a.m. to 1:30 a.m. the following day. Friday through Saturday will be 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. the following day.
We now all know where we're going when we're hungry late at night on the weekends.
As far as employees, they anticipate 50 to 60 full-time and part-time employees, with 12 to 15 employees on a peak shift with 3 shifts. Both of the uses proposed are permitted within the HD zone. The Raising Cane's is located, the physical structure is located on Lot 10. Starbucks is located on Lot 12. And that is noteworthy as your ordinance requires that there's one principal use, principal building per lot. So each building is designated to a particular lot and therefore is conforming with your ordinance. The proposed improvements are compliant with the bulk requirements for the HD zone, with the exception of the minimum gross floor area per building, as well as the maximum impervious coverage. Now, regarding the minimum gross floor area per building, by ordinance, the building should be about 10,000 square feet. So on these lots, in order to try to achieve a 10,000 square foot building here, whether it be vertical or just the literal footprint, the footprint of the improvements that would be required would be so significant that we would not be able to make up the flood storage that's required because we're in the flood plain here. So as a result of that, we're going to have to come in with a smaller building, and therefore we would request relief for that. With the impervious coverage, the proposed impervious coverage for the overall development is approximately 59.3%. As I mentioned before, 55% was required by the ordinance. When we break these down by lot, Lot 10, which is the Raising Cane's, is 52.8%, which is below the 55% which is required, so that is compliant. Lot 12 is 63.9%. We do need relief for that, but I do note that under existing conditions, that was 92%, so we have a reduction of about 28%.
So we improved the situation.
Correct. And the reduction in the impervious surfaces obviously benefits the overall area by a reduction in the amount of stormwater runoff that's generated by the property, and it also improves the aesthetics of the property. Parking on the site is based on, per ordinance, is based on the number of seats. So Starbucks is going to have 22 interior seats and 14 exterior seats, which is approximately 36 total seats, and that equates to 12 parking spaces are required. Raising Cane's is going to have 46 interior seats with an additional 11 on the exterior, which gives us 57 total seats and equates to approximately 19 parking spaces. So altogether, 31 parking spaces are required for the proposed improvements. The total amount of parking provided is 98 spaces, which is compliant with the ordinance. This includes 4 ADA spaces, 4 EV make-ready spaces, and then there's also 6 mobile ordering or quick serve spaces, so people can come in and 5 minutes later they got to be out. So it includes an additional 6 of those as well.
And you have enough for employees?
Yes. Yeah. So
We're good on parking.
So similar to the existing conditions, the parking spaces are proposed at 9 by 20, and there are the straight lined striping between the spaces. As I previously indicated, the ordinance requires a 10 by 20 space and hairpin striping. The 9 by 20 with a straight stripe is something that is the size of space, and the designation, the marker of the space, is consistent throughout the industry. We feel that the size and the type of striping is adequate for the proposed uses. It's also consistent with all the shopping center and everything else around us. So we are requesting relief for both of those. Access to the property continues to be by the two access points, the right in, right out off of Route 46, and the two-way drive aisle coming in from the adjacent access easement on lot 1401. The driveway down at Route 46, as I previously indicated, the DOT had just recently replaced this driveway. We are not changing anything about the driveway, and as a result of that, we have made application to the DOT, and we're able to get a letter of no interest, so there's no improvements that are being done to that existing driveway, and it was just recently constructed. And I guess just to mention again that we are requesting the relief for the existing nonconformity of the width of the driveway being wider. The DOT constructed that at 52.65 feet, whereas 30 feet is permitted by ordinance. Regarding the access drive coming in at the northeast corner from that access easement, we have the alignment of this access drive is being maintained as it enters the property. By adding on the length of the parking spaces of 20 feet, we end up with a 3-foot setback coming off of the northern property line, whereas for parking, 4-foot setback is required by ordinance. We looked at seeing, can we pull this back in order to achieve that 4-foot, and we determined that it was safer to keep the alignment of this drive aisle and not reduce the parking space, because then if you have a larger vehicle, then it may hang out into the drive aisle. So we opted to maintain the length of the space, and as a result, we have to request relief for the encroachment on that northern property line by approximately a foot. We don't see any negative impacts to that, as this just will grade down to the property line, and it should not result in any negative impact. Circulation on the property is predominantly two-way circulation. The only areas that we have one-way circulation are in the drive-throughs. As I mentioned before, the property is 2 lots, Lot 10 and Lot 12. And since they're sharing access points, in order to allow for the shared access, we're going to have an access easement over the properties. So as a condition of any approval, we would agree to make the appropriate access easements be provided over the property.
Could you indicate the traffic flow?
So as you enter in off of Route 46, okay, this is a right in here. You can go north, and shortly after entering the site, you have to make the decision, are you going to go north up to Starbucks, or you would make a left and then head west, and you would wrap around, and then as you approach the Raising Cane's building, you would make a turn right, go north, up, and then this is where the parking for Raising Cane's would begin. And then if you were choosing to go to the drive-through, as you continued north, you would make a turn to the west, and then that would take you to the entrance to the drive-through of the Raising Cane. And then from that point on, it's one-way circulation in a counterclockwise direction until you would meet back up with the main drive aisle that brought you into the Raising Cane's. Now, if you were going to Starbucks, you would continue in a northerly direction, and then you would approach the drive-through lanes on the left. If you were going to go and you turn left, and then again, you'd have counterclockwise circulation, you'd wrap around, and then it would bring you back out in the vicinity of the initial intersection where you had to decide to go to Starbucks or to Raising Cane's. You can, if you got in here, you can continue in a northerly direction. If you were not going to go to the drive-through and all the parking was taken, you can continue in a northerly direction, and then you could turn left and head west down towards Raising Cane's, and then you can continue to loop around and then exit back out onto Route 46. Or you could also, as you're approaching the top past Starbucks, you could take a right and head out through the access easement, which would then allow you to get to Two Bridges Road or Jose Tejas, if that was your
How many cars can you stack at the drive-through?
At the drive-through. On the Starbucks, you can get 16 vehicles. which is adequate. This is typically the Starbucks is looking to have like 10 to 12. So this, we feel that for operationally, this is more than adequate for that. And on the Raising Cane's, there's the ability to have 24 spaces there, and operationally, that's what they would like to have.
You can tell that operationally, is it the same if the Starbucks was in a town or off the highway? It doesn't matter, the stacking?
Well, given the queue, I can't speak specifically if it was in a downtown area, but in similar Starbucks along a highway, in this scenario, what they optimally are looking for is 10 to 12. So we have 16, so we're,
So with that kind of traffic flow, you would consider 16 adequate?
yes.
Is there
That's
gonna
a
be
big-
a
that's a
single
big
lane?
queue.
Is there gonna be a single lane that goes all the way around, or is it gonna be a double lane?
This, on the Starbucks, it starts out as a double, and then it wraps around as you make the left, going back towards the building is where the order station is, and then it's a single lane from there until you pick up your coffee and your goodies, and then you would exit the site.
What if you're in that lane and you find that you're not happy with your order? How do you pass everybody?
In this particular case,
Yes.
once you approach and you get in the queue, there is not a bypass.
Well, wouldn't it make sense to do a double lane, so if you change your mind, you can get out of it on both buildings?
Right, so over on Raising Cane's, there are 2 drive-through lanes that would wrap around to the order stations, or as you wrap around the corner and you start heading in a easterly direction, the order stations are there, and then they will, the outer lane will then merge with the inner lane on just normal peak. If all of a sudden it becomes very busy at that time, they have the ability to extend the outer lane up in order to increase the service there and cut down the traffic timing and keep everybody moving.
But you don't have that opportunity on the Starbucks.
On the Starbucks, we do not. And
Let me-
part of the
let me make a
problem with
comment to that.
why we don't have the bypass lane here, as I've mentioned a couple times so far, one of the challenges that we have with these properties, and basically all the areas around here, is the flood storage. Because of the zero net fill that the DEP requires. And in order to get all these developments up, you have to be able to offset all your fill with the cuts on your property. So in order to get the buildings and as much of the parking up as we possibly can to get that up above the flood lines as DEP is looking for us to do, we have to create flood storage areas. So there are two flood storage areas were created in order to try to balance those cut and fills. Between the Starbucks and the Raising Cane's, this big green area here, that is just a big flood storage where we filled in certain spots and we had to cut down in order to offset that fill. The other area is over on Lot 10, this whole corner, the northwest corner and going around the western property line. All this here is been excavated down in order to offset the fill that we have to do in order to bring this development up.
And
So
that
in
DEP
doing that,
permit can't be changed.
so to widen this drive aisle would significantly reduce the cut fill and the flood storage and make the developments not possible. So when we were going through with the DEP, which we have the DEP approval now, this was the design that we had to do in order to be able to offset that. And then since the DEP approval has taken place, the DEP has changed the rules again, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and they've gone and added another couple feet to the flood levels. So if if we have to go and make changes to the DEP, there's a possibility that the application would have to get reviewed by the current standards, and then this development, pretty much most of the developments in this area are not going to be able to be built by raising the flood storage another 2 to 3 feet.
And operationally, is that an issue, not having a bypass lane there? Are you gonna have disgruntled customers? Do you do,
We've discussed this with Starbucks. They have numerous sites that don't have that. And the time from when you're placing your order, Starbucks has everything very efficient, so they move things through. So if you do get in here and you change your mind, then it's only gonna be a couple minutes.
and on the Raising Cane's, you talked about at peak times using a double lane.
Correct.
How does that work? Are people gonna be running across the lanes with orders for the cars?
So what they do is, once the, if the peak comes to the point where they need to open up the second lane, they will turn off the order stations that are there, and then they'll have their crew that would be down there with their tablets taking your order. And then at that point, both lanes would just move forward instead of crossing over and going into a single lane. Both lanes would move forward up to the window. Up by the window, there's a canopy that one of their employees would go and pick up their food and then would take it over to the window.
The Raising Cane's alleged claim to fame is from order to leaving, 2.5 minutes. Pretty impressive.
Where does, where does the drive-through start? On the western side, on Raising Cane?
On Raising
Where the
Cane-
3 hours are on the plan there?
Yeah, basically at the end of this island, that would be where the drive-through queuing is being measured to. And then the outer lane, the outer arrow is a bypass. So that if somebody did come down here, you'd be able to bypass around.
And this is a similar setup in other locations? I mean, because my concern is, you know, a Chick-fil-A kind of, Sonic kind of, you know, traffic all over the place. It's just a mess.
Yeah, so I mean, having 24 queuing positions, that's a great start to begin with. And if, in the event that there were a peak that was greater than what the queue could handle, it would be a little bit further back into this northern parking area. It's not really going to impact the main circulation. Again, we do have a bypass lane here that if somebody did get here, come around and going west through this drive aisle and see that the queuing is backing all the way up here, they'd be able to say, you know what, I'm gonna drive around, I'm gonna come back in, I'm gonna park over here, walk in and get my order.
So under no circumstances would you see the stacking going out onto the highway?
No, we'll have a traffic engineer here to talk about that as well, but no, I do not anticipate that we would ever see that scenario.
Funny you should say that. That was a comment I had, and said that under no circumstances can we allow any queuing out on 46. It's never gonna happen in this particular situation.
I personally don't like the fact that on Starbucks, there's only one lane. You get stuck in there and you say that they serve quickly, but that doesn't always happen. And if you're stuck in that lane, you're gonna be there for a while.
But
And you can't get out, you're stuck.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna be limited, because you can't pull out and get around, but Starbucks has their direction. They need to turn the product around in a certain period of time. Occasionally, may it be a little longer, possibly if something goes wrong inside, but they have everything worked down to a science to be able to keep everything moving, and they have numerous locations at this. Starbucks wouldn't go and invest all the money into a plan like this if they had real grave concerns about it.
Oh, I've seen backup on Starbucks because of that problem.
Yeah,
So I've
and
seen that
I'm not gonna say
happen.
that it never happens, but they, operationally, we've had this discussion, and they're confident that having a single lane is adequate and is not gonna discourage their customers, and they're gonna keep coming back. Otherwise, they wouldn't put the money into a plan like this.
Question? you're asking for some of the variances on parking. One is for the 10 by 20 to be 9 by 20, and the other is for not having hairpin striping.
Correct.
You have 98 spaces over what you need. Why could you not do away with those two variances?
Well, starting with the hairpin striping, if the board wants hairpin striping, we can certainly do the hairpin striping. All the hairpin striping does is offsets the existing lines, or the lines that we have shown here. It offsets a certain distance and helps cars to get into the middle. A lot of times you'll see that in a shopping center where there's carts, so that people physically park where they need to be and carts can get through. But since we don't have carts at these locations, we feel that the straight line is acceptable. But if that's something that the board wants, we can certainly do the hairpin striping. Nobody else around us has the hairpin striping, but if that's what the board wants, we'll certainly do that.
Okay. Well, then the size, you're addressing the size of it also?
Correct.
I mean, those are variances that are on our ordinances now, whether we change them or not, could be discussed at a different position. But, I mean, there are variances that you may or may not need that we should consider.
Yeah, and as far as the stall size, from an operations perspective, per ordinance, you need 31 parking spaces. But from an operation perspective, they need much more than what your ordinances require. That's why we want to maintain the number of parking spaces that we have. And at some point, as even in the last discussion, we were talking about EVs. As EVs become more popular, then that may be something where we may want to put some EV parking spaces up in this area. But if we eliminate all those spaces, then we can't.
I'm not saying to eliminate all your excess, but I agree that you probably could use the spaces there. But if you, I mean, would you lose 10 spaces by doing away with one of those?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how many that would be, but my guess is it's probably going to be 1, 2. Yeah, probably around 10 that we would lose.
Okay.
So we would like to keep as many parking spaces as we can, from operationally by the number of employees that we have, make sure that there's plenty of room for the employees to be parking kind of away from the high demand locations, and as well as to be able to have some for potential EV spaces in the future. So that would be our request. I guess that's up to the board as to how you feel about it. We feel that the 98 is a good number for the proposed improvements that we have here based on the tenants.
Thank you.
So the on-site circulation, as I mentioned, the two-way circulation. The drive aisles are between 24 and 28 feet. There's really only one 28-foot, which is between the Raising Cane's and the Starbucks. All the other ones are 24 feet in width, with the exception of the drive-through lanes. We've identified them as 12 feet, and that's one-way circulation. The one-way circulation is supposed to be 15 feet. We have shown them as 12 feet, and this goes back again to that flood storage discussion. In the east-west direction, we were trying to minimize or maximize the flood storage. So therefore, we were minimizing those drive aisles to the width of a drive aisle that is customarily used and would be safe for the customers. So that's why we have the 12-foot here opposed to 15 feet in all the drive aisles, because the east-west direction is where we start to lose a lot of the storage volume that was required in order to balance the site. In the drive-throughs, I think I mentioned as previously that they have there's order boards, there's menu boards. Both Raising Cane and Starbucks have a pre-menu board and a menu board. They're located along the drive-through. The site has been designed to accommodate a tractor-trailer to navigate through. The tractor-trailer can come in off of Route 46, enter in and circulate in the westerly direction and wrap around the property, come up north, and then turn south along the front of Starbucks and then exit back out onto Route 46. The other alternative is that they could also go back out through the northeastern access point and head up to Twin Bridge Road.
And tractor trailers are for deliveries?
Yes. We also had some comments from the fire department to confirm that their fire vehicle can navigate through. We were able to get a template from the engineering office, and we've run the fire truck, and the fire truck can safely navigate all the way around the property, through the bypass lane, and come back and exit the site onto Route 46. So we have forwarded that over to the fire department. We did get a current letter, and he was asking further questions, saying that we didn't have the right truck. So we're trying to confirm we'll rerun whatever truck that he needs. But based on the information that we had received, the fire truck can safely navigate through the property.
Could you just identify where they asked for 2 fire hydrants on site? Could you identify where they are on the site?
Right, so we actually had discussions, and that was the other comment. We tried to get in touch with, we were speaking with Joseph Problinski Jr.
Yeah.
So we actually had a discussion with him, and he had indicated that we only needed to do 1 fire hydrant, which we provided that in the back, because there is another fire hydrant right up by the beginning of the off-ramp on Route 46.
Okay.
So there's a fire hydrant here, and he had told us that we only had to do 1, and we provided that in the rear. So we're gonna circle back with him. If we need to do another one, then we'll provide another one. But we believe that what we have on here, and then off the page, there's another fire hydrant over in this vicinity. So I think that it's covered.
Are the hydrants, what's the distance from the fire hydrant to the fire department connection on the building? Where they're going to be?
You know, that I don't know exactly where that connection is, but from this one here, the service area is going to be in the back corner. The fire hydrant from Starbucks is, a straight line, is only about 125 feet. So if they had to even if they had to go to the front and they were gonna loop across, you're saying you're within 200 feet of it. And then, oh, okay.
Yeah, listen, if you can put the fire hydrant connection with 100 feet of the hydrant, you'd be good.
Okay, and then actually, Bennett just indicated that because the building does not require a fire department connection because it's not sprinklered. So, and he'll talk about that
Okay.
Later. But yeah, so this building does Raising Cane's have a sprinkler?
The fire sub-code
Okay, so
officials said
both
that
of the
they needed-
buildings do not have sprinklers in them. So and then just for a point of reference, the other fire hydrant is approximately 140 feet from the Raising Cane's building.
Okay.
So they're in close proximity.
Fire alarm?
Okay, as far as deliveries, Starbucks anticipates to have 1 delivery a week, and Raising Cane's would be 2 to 3 times per week. All the deliveries would be done off hours. Trash is, there's an enclosure provided for both Starbucks and Raising Cane's. The trash enclosure for Starbucks is located immediately north of the Starbucks building, and Raising Cane's is immediately west of the Raising Cane's building. The Raising Cane's trash enclosure is located arguably in the side yard setback. Similar to the existing conditions, we had to place that into the side yard. The ordinance prefers that the
enclosure be in the rear yard, but again, moving the trash enclosure to the other side, in order to have the truck safely access that would have to push the trash enclosure, again, beyond the limits of what we have, this northern limit here, which is actually a retaining wall, in order to allow for that flood storage. So in order to do that, we'd be encroaching into that flood storage area again. But just from an operational perspective, it's safer for the customers as well as the crew to have the trash enclosure as close to the service doors as possible, so that they're not having to cross the drive-through lane, or not the drive-through lane, but the drive aisle approaching the drive-through. It's much more desirable and a safe condition to have that trash enclosure on the building side of the drive aisle.
Can I ask one question? Just, I want to go back before I forget.
Sure.
You're telling me Starbucks is going to get one delivery per week?
One delivery per week. Now,
Uh,
now it may increase, but they get one delivery.
I find that hard to believe, a delivery a week. There we go. Now we're brewing with coffee. Okay.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, I guess I misunderstood from.
It's okay, I just want to make sure it's accurate on the
Okay,
record
so
for you, that's
I
all.
stand corrected, so it's once a day for Starbucks, and then it'll be 2 to 3 times a week for the Raising Cane's.
Got it.
And before you said it was off hours, what's off hours for Raising Cane? Is that gonna be like early morning hours, 2:30 in the morning, or is that 7:30 in the morning?
It's early in the morning.
They're going to, it's going to be somewhere when it's closed. So their deliveries are met by the manager. The delivery driver is met by the manager. So presumably they're gonna try to get it closer to when the store is either closing or opening, so that the manager is there, but it's going to be done off hours when the operation is closed.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Continue, Tom.
Okay. As far as garbage, it's picked up by a local hauler. There are 2 dumpsters within the enclosure. One will be for recycling and one is for the garbage. The design of the property, as I've mentioned numerous times, that the property is in the floodplain. So the proposed design of the grading is such that the buildings are set 1 foot above the flood elevation in this area, and per the DEP requirements. And as a result, everything around it has been brought up. The site's been graded to maintain the existing drainage patterns in the area. All the development has designed to have surface runoff going towards inlets that get picked up by pipes that ultimately collect and discharge to the existing stormwater conveyance system in Route 46. Now, as I mentioned, there were 2 other drainage areas that are very small. We've maintained those drainage areas so that there's some overland flow that goes out to Route 46, and the rest continues over to the inlet that's in the access utility easement on the adjacent property. The flood storage areas that we have discussed previously, those are not detention basins. They're not really used to collect stormwater, but they do have an under drain system in it, so that any water that does collect and get on here has the ability to ultimately drain out, and that does connect into the on-site collection system. The overall project is a major stormwater design, and it has been designed to be compliant with your ordinance and the DEP. And as I mentioned, we do have the flood hazard approval from the DEP.
We'll need to produce a drainage maintenance agreement.
Right, we actually have provided the operation and maintenance manual in our last submission.
And how deep are those areas?
These areas are approximately 3 to 4 feet. They vary as you go across. Actually, on the north and south sides, they're basically at grade. It's the only areas where there's a retaining wall that goes between the drive-through lane for Starbucks and this flood storage area, as well as at the head of the parking spaces east of Raising Cane's. Though there's retaining walls there, but on the edges, it's actually open. It's not open, it's flat, and then there's guide rail there to prevent people from accidentally driving in or intentionally driving in to them.
And that's to invite the water into the space from the driveway areas?
No, it's actually, the reason why these areas are down is because the DEP, they call it ineffective flow. If the flood waters come up and then they can't safely just move, just slosh around. So if these walls were elevated, then they would consider that ineffective flow, and then it wouldn't be compliant with their standards. So that's why these areas here are down, but then we were able to put retaining walls to keep the parking spaces up so we could maintain acceptable slopes, safe slopes for the cars that are parked in those areas or coming up the drive-through lanes.
Tom, do you think it's appropriate to start showing him the elevations?
Okay, you mean the grades? When you say elevation?
The actual physical buildings.
Okay.
The elevation. I'm looking at it to your right, the elevation. The pictures of the buildings.
Right, yeah, that's what I was going to.
And is there fencing around those areas where you've got the retaining walls?
Yes, there's, okay, so as far as the elevations, so I have the Raising Cane here, Ben has the Starbucks.
Okay, just put them up. Let them see it. So
The
they
answer to
understand.
that question is yes, the retaining walls have fences integrated into, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure who asked the question.
I did.
So yes, that there are retaining walls, there are fences on top of the retaining walls in order to maintain that fall protection.
Can I just ask a question about your hours? You talked about 1:30. Is that the restaurant itself open, or is that just drive-through?
Actually,
It's the restaurant and the drive.
so the restaurant and.
Is she gonna
restaurant and
test,
drive-through.
is she gonna
Said
testify
3:30,
your
right?
operations?
3:30
Excuse me,
is on the
counsel.
weekend.
Are you gonna have someone from operations testify?
There's somebody here from operations.
So 3:30 is on Friday and Saturday. The other days is 1:30, Sunday through Thursday. So, yeah, so this is the
This
reason-
being what? Market as, I believe, A3?
So, A3 is the proposed exterior elevations, sheet number EL1 with a date of 10/10/23 on it. This shows the various elevations and the signage associated with the application. This is, the upper right is the facade facing Route 46. Then as you wrap around the corner, this is the east side of the Raising Cane's building. You can see the drive-through services there. And then the entrance doors on the right side of that section. This is the west side of the building, and then the upper left corner would be the north side of the building. As you can see from here, we have several signs that we're requesting. There's the Raising Cane signs. Then
there are a couple murals that Raising Cane's is part of every one of their buildings that they have. That is kind of their trademark. They have this drive-through, they call it a mural. And then there's also the Cane, the dog mural, and the Raising Cane's mural on the east facade. These are all painted onto the building. And this is something that's really important to the brand, as this, it talks about the origins of their company and the philosophy of their company. So those are really important to them. And then the other signage that they have, as I mentioned, is just the Raising Cane's sign. And then over the canopy at the front door, they have a One Love sign located there.
And are all of those non-painted signs illuminated?
Yes. Yes, they are internally illuminated. The exterior, the murals are, there's a light bar that goes across and it just shines light down on the murals. But all the other signs are internally illuminated.
Where is your east facade again? Can you?
The east facade is this middle
Okay.
facade here.
One of the comments was that the square foot, the signage would need a variance there?
Right, the way the ordinance calculates the signage is it's 10% of the square footage of that facade. The Raising Cane's mural exceeds what the allowable is, and
About 65 square feet.
yeah, so we are increasing on the east facade, we're proposing 170.25 square feet, whereas 105.66 square feet is permitted. And it's really because of this mural, which is really important to the brand. Because on this particular mural, they write the name, the location of where this is. And it's my understanding that there's a social media presence where people go around and they take pictures of themselves with the banner that says where they are. So this is a very important mural.
And they're all the same size? Every Raising Cane restaurant is the same size sign?
I can't say that every single one is the exact same size, but the size of the sign is designed to fit the architectural elements. And this is the size sign that they believe architecturally fits best with this facade.
With regard to the plans that we have, that sign's a little bit different.
That's different than
what
this one.
shows on yours, so.
Picture of a
You may
dog
want
and a fish and a.
Yeah, so I think that was in the plans, when we updated our plans, I don't think the architectural elevations had gotten updated, but on our plans, the ones that were resubmitted, we actually have this.
That's to
shown.
be that.
Yes, so this is actually in our plans, but I guess it wasn't on the original rendering that was submitted.
Fine.
The signs have been designed to fit the building specifically, so that nothing is meant to be excessive. Everything is meant to be tasteful. You wanna bring up the Starbucks?
Okay.
Let's mark that as A4.
Okay, so A4 is a architectural rendering prepared by Bergman Architects, Engineers, and Planners. I'm looking to see if there's a date on here. It looks like it's undated. And this shows the let me just see. So, and this is showing the two of the facades. This would be the eastern facade,
where all the parking and the main entrance is, and this is the bottom view. And then the upper view is the northern facade where the outdoor seating is, and then the secondary access to the building.
And this is for this actual building, not a generic rendering?
Yeah, this is specific to the Fairfield, correct. And so on this, the Starbucks, they have, there are a couple signs that they have the logo, which is on, let me see, Starbucks has the logo sign, which is a circle on the south facade, the east facade, and the north facade. And they, on the north and the east facade, next to the logo is the drive-through sign. And then on the south facade, the only signage is the logo. On the west facade, there is just the word Starbucks is written, which I don't have a elevation of that, but it's just written on the northwest corner of the building.
Can you talk about the freestanding sign that is 0 feet from the property line, where 25 feet is required?
Okay, so the freestanding sign, we're proposing in the exact same location as the original sign. We're actually using the supports from the original sign and just replacing the signage up above. And so the freestanding sign is going to be 64.7 square feet in size, where 65 square feet is permitted. We'll have a height of 23 feet, where 25 is permitted, and clearance of 14, where minimum of 10 feet is required. So we, as previously indicated, we are maintaining the exact same support, so we're going to maintain that 0-foot setback, and so we would request relief for
Is it going to be a dual sign, Raising Cane, Starbucks sign?
The Raising Cane is on top, and the Starbucks is below. Now I can show that. That is on our detail sheet.
Mark that as A5.
So our detail sheet, which is page 11 of our set of plans, 11 of 16. And this shows that we're maintaining the existing column and just replacing the sign up above.
And you saw no provision to move that back at all? Or you just, are you doing this strictly because you have supports there?
Correct. It's an existing sign, structure that's there. The structure itself is still in good condition. It allows us to have good visibility as you're coming west on Route 46. You don't want to go too far. You want to have good visibility, because otherwise you're going to, if you're coming down here and then if you miss this.
Well, I think there's a good, you have an ability to at least try and get closer to what the ordinance likes, and it looks like you have the room instead of having the sign right on the, I mean, that was, the original sign was probably put there so many years ago that we didn't have that ordinance. And in keeping with, I think, at least the town, the way we like to project things from the highway, if that could be moved back, I think that'd be a big improvement. So it's just not right on the, I mean, 0 is really right on the highway.
So if we were to push the sign back, we would need to adjust some of these street trees, because as you push the sign back, the street trees that your ordinance requires is going to block the visibility of that sign.
So there is no, you're telling me there's no way to move that sign back?
Without making some other modifications. I mean, that is, this is a good location for it. As it is, the property line is already, the property line is already 25 feet past the curb line. And from the actual, let me see. Yeah, from the actual, it looks like from the actual travel way, it's approximately 35 feet or so back off the travel way. So if you push the sign even further back, then you're gonna be 50 feet away from, we won't be able to get the full 25. We wouldn't be able to achieve that, so we would still need relief for it. But the further you push it back, we gotta also take into consideration that how far back the right-of-way is from the roadway.
So how far could you push it back?
Let's see down here.
Probably about 10 feet or so.
Oh, here it is.
Better than zero. I don't know how anybody else feels, but, I mean, that's one of the things we try and do here on our highway. Not have it look like there's sign after sign after sign of billboards right in front of you.
Okay, yeah, we feel that the location of that sign from a safety, visibility and all that is, that's the ideal sign. If we do make any moves, we were gonna have to do some adjustments with the street trees. But I think that our traffic engineer has some other supporting information from a traffic perspective that he'd like to offer up before any decision is made.
Sure.
With regard to that.
Steve, the other signs that we put along the highway, what were the setbacks on some of the newer developments? Do you recall?
No, I don't. And I was wondering, are you able to relate it to, say, the signage on the property before it, or signage on, do you have any of that information on any of your maps, how far it's set back? Say the Jose Tejas, or I don't know if that office building has it along that stretch, just to give a little
I'm not sure
sense
where that is. Yeah, I don't.
how that would relate. I can't reliably let you know, Paul, where they've been further down.
So from, I guess, I think from my presentation, that's,
If no one has any further questions of this good-looking engineer, I have my traffic person. I'd like to try and,
Well, I have a
as a
question.
courtesy to all of you, try and get him on tonight.
On the,
I think that,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I had a question.
Oh.
No, on the
You-
sign,
you
it's,
get to go first.
it appears that that sign is pretty high. So what's the height of the trees in the front?
23 feet.
The
Well, as
trees?
The height of the sign goes up to 23 feet, and then it sticks down. It's 14 feet off the ground, so it has about, 9 feet of signage. So the 14 feet up, and at the time of planting, those trees are not going to be blocking them, but as in short order, the trees are going to grow and then open up and would be blocking the visibility.
Well, aren't there other kind of trees that you could use that don't grow as high?
Well, the bottom of the sign's gonna be 14 feet, so most trees are gonna grow above 14 feet, and therefore you're gonna start blocking the visibility of the sign.
I think we.
You could use dwarf trees, right?
I think we're looking to be consistent with the other signs on the highway, and we don't have that information right now to say that's okay or not okay. But we're looking to be consistent along the highway.
I'm looking at Google Earth right now, and I could see Jose Tejas is probably double the distance away from the highway than the Houlihan sign. You know, without giving you an exact measurement, but that's definitely jogged back, and I gotta be honest, that sign is very visible. All it says is eat. I remember looking at it for 35 years. I mean, that sign has no problem being present at that location, to be honest with you. But to everyone else's point, trying to maintain conformity.
But the new shopping center, that sign, just next
That
door
was
to
a
the
bad-
wall.
And
Do those signs have the street trees around them? I don't believe that they do.
Well, they have low plantings. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
so
no street
lower
trees.
planted.
I mean, the DoubleTree, their signs are back.
Now, we have the ability to correct something now that we see that we might want to correct.
Right, and it was just brought to my attention that on the adjacent property, there are some DOT signs, the big directional signs, that are also an obstacle that would be blocking the signs the further you move it back. So,
Well, they're quite low.
You're not gonna see it. Let Gary address it before we make a decision. He can have better input into it. That sign has been there, it's sort of grandfathered, but, let Gary address it so the board has a better sense of it. You have anything else?
Any other questions from
Any
the
other
board?
questions of this gentleman?
Any questions from the public? Seeing no one, we're good.
I'd like to call my trusty traffic engineer, who you may recall.
That looks awful familiar.
Looks familiar.
In your
Be so
value
kind as
tonight
to
from
swear
me.
him in.
Swear firm testimony about to you before the board, streets up you got.
Yes, I do.
For the record, can you state and spell your name?
Certainly. Gary Dean, D-E-A-N.
And your licenses are in full force and effect.
Licensed professional engineer, licensed professional planner, and licenses are current and valid and in good standing. Thank you.
Chairman's been sworn into office.
Thank you.
Just by way of brief background, we've been involved with the applicant since project inception, looking principally at access and then circulation around the site. As you've heard, basically these are two drive-through restaurants, and as a result, they require counterclockwise traffic flow for each of the drive-throughs. One of the first elements that we thought it was appropriate to address was related to DOT, and as you heard from Mr. Pugsley, that driveway, and I'm pointing to that, but the site driveway on Route 46 was reconstructed by NJDOT, and I think they finished in September of 2021. And they put in all new curbing, all new radii, they changed the inlets out along the highway. And as part of this project, recognizing the conversion from Houlihan's and then later some kind of banquet facility, we wanted to identify any issues with DOT, even though they built the driveway. And so we had a meeting with them and discussed all of the elements of the site design and circulation. And I'm very pleased to say, and if we haven't submitted it to you, we will, but we have already obtained NJDOT. It's essentially called a letter of no interest, but it's their acknowledgement that the driveway design is appropriate and suitable for the change in use, recognizing that we're basically swapping out restaurant for restaurant. And that driveway, as you see it on the plan, was designed, again, constructed by DOT, and it accommodates, you'll see it has rather large radii to accommodate the delivery trucks that are expected. So that saved a lot of, potential issues. And then through a series of easements, the site traffic does have access further away from the site. And as part of that evaluation, and I know at some point your police department had asked, and for our own internal benefit and to satisfy DOT, we had done some traffic counsel on Two Bridges Road and the shared access that is to the rear. And we can provide that to your police, but I think with the change in use and recognizing this, that this is a redevelopment of a previously developed site that obviously generated a fair amount of traffic, we're sort of maintaining that status quo. One of the more interesting elements about the two uses is Starbucks, as you can imagine, is principally a breakfast time use. And Raising Cane's doesn't even open till 9:30. It's principally lunch, dinner, and obviously later hours. So they're never busy at the same time. And that as opposed to, say, a Taco Bell and a Wendy's or something of that ilk, it does tend to manage the traffic much more efficiently. One of the other elements we did is we consulted, and our office has been involved with, I think at this point we're up to 20 or 25 different Starbucks applications. This drive-through design with 16 vehicles, which equates to about 320 feet of stacking, puts it in the top 92% of the most stacking for Starbucks sites in New Jersey. 92% of the sites have less stacking than this does. And the standard that we've always used for Starbucks has been 10. They're a little different than Dunkin' or some of the other brands. We've noticed that since the pandemic, there's been a little more, I'll say, customer preference to stay in the drive-through. And that has increased the queuing, the stacking that's needed a little bit more. This one has 16, and if you think about the time of transaction between placing an order and then ultimately picking it up, with 16 cars ahead of you, if you're the 17th car, you'll find it much easier to go park and go inside. One of the other things that has changed quick service restaurants is the mobile apps, where people have it on their phone, their payment is already prearranged, and so whether when they're leaving their house or they can just talk to Siri and have them order it, it allows that type of customer that traditionally would use a drive-through and sit in line, they can come in, park right in front, go in and retrieve their order very quickly. So with that shift, we have seen a few more people in the drive-through, but we're seeing more as they become accustomed to the app, taking advantage of that. So with 16, we're absolutely convinced that this exceeds the design. We acknowledge that it is a captive drive-through design, meaning it doesn't have a bypass. Those types of bypasses are for convenience. And if someone paid for an order and for whatever reason decided they want to leave, they wait. They wait to leave. It's a convenience item. It's not a safety issue. Of the Starbucks, and we've surveyed, it's 36 different locations, there are, I'll say many of them don't have a bypass. Parsippany on major state highways, just to name just one that I can think of very quickly. There's one in Edison on Route 27 that does not have a bypass. Parsippany on Route 10 does not have a bypass. I won't go through the entire list, but I'll say it is not an essential component to have the bypass. It's if you're envisioning yourself as the 8th person in line and you want to leave for whatever reason, okay, whoops, I shouldn't have gotten in line, and you'll wait. So it's not something that's essential for safety. It is really an amenity that some sites have and some don't. This particular applicant has had a number of Burger King franchise, none of which had drive-throughs, or excuse me, bypass lanes. So again, some places have it, some don't. In terms of Raising Cane's, we have stacking for 24. It's somewhat unique in that that is more than double what is typically provided for, I'll say, the gamut of Wendy's, Taco Bell, and the like. Part of that reason is, yes, as we've seen, Chick-fil-A is popular, their nearest competitor. For whatever reason, and I think it's principally speed of service, that staying in the drive-through tends to generate more demand. With 24 spaces, it's sort of like designing the turnpike with multiple service lanes to accommodate peak times, or even service stations, probably a better example, where you'll see at 10 o'clock at night, a lot of those fueling positions or turnpike lanes are closed because you don't need the employees, you don't have the demand for it. That's precisely what this design allows for, is that it is designed to accommodate peak, but most of the time, that second lane won't be used. It'll be coned off, and operationally, drivers will proceed in a traditional single file orientation. The other benefit, as you've seen from the design, the entrance is to the far right-hand corner, lower right-hand corner of the exhibit, which is the southeast corner of the site. And Raising Cane's is located all the way to the western end of the site. Usually the concern with drive-through stacking, and there are lots of bad examples, as anyone was familiar, and I don't mean to single out Starbucks. The pandemic changed how we all visited restaurants for a brief period, but there's a Starbucks on Route 23 near Willowbrook Mall. And demand was so high, and you couldn't go into the store, so the only option was the drive-through. What eventually happened was people were queuing out on the highway. That's not in any way a safe circumstance. And Starbucks, to their credit, closed the driveway and required their customers to come in and reverse. And what that allowed is all of that stacking to occur nowhere near the driveway. In this case, because Raising Cane's is all the way to the west, you can see that all of that stacking activity can completely be contained, within their pad or lot, if you will. And same thing with Starbucks. Imagine if that queue exceeded 16 and then came all the way through the parking lot. Before we got to the highway, it would probably be, if that's 16, well, we'd have 32, it's 40 vehicles in line. I can't conceive it's a great product if anyone is willing to wait an hour for a cup of coffee. So for those reasons.
Yeah, but I can't figure out paying $8 for a cup of coffee either, so I'm still, yeah.
This design takes best advantage of the depth of the property in laying out the drive-through to accommodate the counterclockwise flow. I know there was some concern about the parking, and that is something we can discuss. We have proposed 9-foot wide by 20-foot deep parking spaces. I would submit that 9-foot wide by 18-foot deep is the current standard. The longest vehicle on the road, other than a twin cab pickup with an 8-foot bed, is a Suburban at 18 feet 3 inches. Everything else fits in an 18 feet deep spot. So 20 is luxurious. What it does, and particularly in a community where flooding is a sensitive issue, obviously anything that can be done to reduce pavement is what we should be considering. And that's one of the reasons, 10-foot wide spaces are great, but they take up a lot of blacktop. They're 10% less efficient. So we've adhered to the depth standards of your ordinance, but have requested the variance for the 9-foot width, principally acknowledging most of the times customers will be single occupant vehicles, particularly at peak times when the parking lot could be more, we'll say fuller, and it's a more efficient design. If the board really wants to see 10-foot wide spaces, we can have that discussion. I will say, to make the 9-foot more efficient, the hairpin striping as is required narrows the space visually to look like 8 feet. And what it does is it makes us better drivers. It gives us a narrower target to align our car better in the spot, as opposed to being skewed or a little bit to one side or the other. So that is one of the benefits of that type of design. And I can understand the value of hairpin striping.
So you wouldn't, I'm sorry, just a quick question to that.
Sure.
You wouldn't lose any spaces if you go to hairpin? It would just basically make the 9-foot space a little short?
What happens is that the space complies with your ordinance at 9 feet wide, but when you go to stripe it, it takes twice as much paint, right? You have to make 2 lines instead of 1. Each line is 6 inches inside of where one would see the 9 foot. So you wind up with an 8-foot, we'll say, target area to line your car up, but then you have 2 feet to then open your door and get out. So it complies with the dimensional 9 feet. It's just, the appearance is a little narrower. So that's what I mean. You tend to pull in straighter and aligned in the spot better. In terms of overall access, given that we've met with DOT, had those discussions and received that waiver, our permit continues to remain valid, and there are no other changes. I think beyond that, there were minor comments that your police had, and in working with Mr. Pugsley, we fixed some of the striping where there was some commentary, and I'm pointing, so forgive me, it's to the west of the flood management area, so in between Starbucks to the east and Raising Cane's. You can see where from Two Rivers Road, we had that northerly parking aisle and then the one in between the buildings. Because we need to accommodate a delivery truck, it was a little wider pavement. That has now been cleaned up with stop signs, which the police wanted. And so the traffic on the east to west aisle have right-of-way, and it still allows the trucks to come in, but it does provide better organization in that area. Beyond that, I'd say it's as traditional a design with 90-degree parking. We have 24-foot aisles. And in terms of the operation of Raising Cane, again, with the 2 drive-through system, what happens during off-peak times, we can still accommodate 2 drive-through lanes for a period. There is a second order station, and I'm pointing, so forgive me again. There is a order station menu board on the north side, the innermost aisle, and then one in the median between the lanes. So someone can order it either. They are under cover, so for weather protection, and then during off-peak times, rather than requiring personnel to be in the lot, then that vehicle just merges and then comes to a single lane. It's very similar. McDonald's has rolled out a double drive-through system in the past few years. And again, it's to improve efficiency and speed, and keep that process moving through the drive-through. Beyond that, in terms of everything else, I think continuing to have the interconnection between our site and Jose Tejas and the other buildings to our north and west is advantageous. I did want to touch upon the sign, and I know that just came up as Mr. Pugsley finished. We are 0 feet away from the right-of-way line. That is correct, and that is a pre-existing sign. It's grandfathered. It's allowed to remain. We understand this is a new site plan. The challenge we have, and I'm going to use my pen to demonstrate, the DOT right-of-way line is deep on this site. They've taken, this is what happens over time. The sign at one point undoubtedly complied, but as the state keeps nibbling into the frontage and lanes are added to Route 46 and now a decel lane, that right-of-way line moves. And so now we're at 0 feet, whereas at some point in time, it did comply. It's 30 feet away from the edge of the roadway. So yes, it's 0 feet as you measure from an invisible line that no one can see, but the fact that that sign is where it needs to be for passing traffic, and again, it's 30 feet away from the road, we believe it's safe, it's efficient, it's functioned for decades, and we understand that your requirements have changed, but it's one of those, if it's not broken, why fix it? And I understand the
If there was such a thing as grandfathering, you wouldn't have needed a variance for it.
We do because we're here for a new site plan, but if somebody came in tomorrow and reoccupied that building, that sign is allowed.
That's why I said we have a chance to correct some things.
Correct. The issue we have is twofold. One, we obviously, the further back we get from the road, the less effective the sign is. So how do we compensate for that? We raise it. We make it higher. Both of these uses attract 60, 75% of their business from the traffic on the highway. People see the sign, they stop in because it's convenient. They're about to get on, continue further to the west. And it's a convenient stop along that route. So people see a sign and they're making a decision quickly to come in. It's not like planning to go to Jose Tejas, which, we'll make a reservation and we'll meet friends and where is it, and we have plenty of time. People are making that decision to come in as they're passing by. So we want to have that identification. As we look at that alternative, my only suggestion or recommendation I'll make, and I believe the height now is 20 feet 7 inches. As we move it further back, we're gonna make it higher, and we have a very large DOT sign. It's off the exhibit, but it will include that sign as we move it back, and I think we'll be coming back. We have a lot of other information to present to you in terms of variances. But I would like to show you what that looks like from a driver's perspective, because when you see it, I don't believe it's as visually offensive as what you may think a 0-foot setback is from the highway. It's not. It's from a right-of-way line that's 30 feet back from the highway, and we want the sign to be effective. Otherwise, it has limited value. So we're asking to continue to use the sign that's there, not push it back further, not raise it up higher, not make it bigger to compensate for the fact that it's not as visible on the highway. And so I did want to touch upon that. I know there are a number of other sign elements. Because of the drive-through, we want to have clear, defined signage so that people can navigate around each site and identify the buildings. And I don't have those specifics in front of me, but in terms of traffic and circulation, I just wanted to highlight the rationale behind wanting to keep that sign. And I think that EAT sign, whoever identified it, it does sit back further. It's both, it's a lot taller, and I don't have that exact dimension. So with that comparison out there, I would like the opportunity to address that, but it's balancing, right? We can move it further back, but we're going to want it higher to compensate for it being less visible to passing traffic. So, to me, that's why we spend a lot of time looking at DOT highway signs. You want them to be seen by motorists, and as soon as they get further and further off, there's a traffic engineering term called a cone of vision, and it's 15 degrees from looking straight ahead. And that's basically our peripheral vision. We want that signage to be generally within that cone of perception. As we get further and further away, people have to look for it and they start taking their eyes off the road. So that is the challenge in balancing, sign ordinances and the need for that information to be clearly conveyed to passing traffic. And there is an element of safety to it. We don't want people having to hunt for that information. Anything else?
Let me ask this magic question. Do you think, as my planner, you can present at this moment?
I think he's gonna be probably about a good half hour.
Correct.
So,
You'd be able to finish in the.
well, I think, Chairman, you close it.
This
You
is
stop
chair call.
taking testimonies off.
There's issues that we might want to clear up.
All right, yeah, because honestly, I think we want to take a look at, be consistent with the signs from what I'm hearing.
Definitely.
You know what I'm saying? So that's something that we need to take a look at. And, so we're not gonna finish tonight and actually vote, so.
Boo.
So. Make a decision to stop at 11 and we'll continue
your
on
call,
May
Mr.
29th.
Chairman.
Are you also gonna put an operations person on?
My operation person would stand up and say, everything that was just said is accurate. I mean, and they could do that right now, if you wish. They're here.
Well, I think that there may be more questions other than
But if there are more questions, that's a different story.
So I would
Other
wait.
than that, I would have my operation person from both Starbucks and Raising Cane to just confirm that what was testified to is accurate and that they would say the same thing. I can do that right now if you want me to do it.
I think your engineer probably didn't, he answered some of the questions for operations, but I think you're probably gonna need an operation person.
For both.
I mean, Is there any, like, scrubbers on for Raising Cane? Do they have, air scrubbers?
So listen, I think it's best that we stop. Come back. And come back
All right,
at this time.
we're stopping.
Do we have any questions or?
Do you have any questions for the traffic study?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Anybody have any questions?
I really enjoyed your presentation. I think you did a excellent job. And there are two things that I'm concerned with. And there's a lot of things I like. I think that in Raising Cane, I like the 2 lanes, and I think is important for that type of drive-through. On Starbucks, I'm still not satisfied with the single lane, and I don't know if there's anything you could do about that by putting in a second lane on there.
I'm gonna make a comment. You do not build a highway Fourth of July. Because you don't build it for the peak. You build it for what you have as lane. The fact that there's only 1 lane is an inconvenience. It may happen. It probably does happen. So somebody has to wait 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, I think it's
That is not
important.
a safety issue.
I think it's important.
You're not-
I know it's not
I'm
a
not
safety. I
disagreeing.
think it's important
I could never
to have a second lane.
How could I possibly disagree? That's how you feel. What am I saying? That's not how you
I don't know
feel?
if anybody else feels that way. I'm telling you what, my
Standard
opinion.
operation rule.
We're very sensitive to impervious coverage, and I know Mr. Pugsley has spent, and again, this project, I think we started 2 years ago, and part of the reason it's taken us so long to get here is the environmental constraints on the site and the sensitivity for flooding and impervious coverage. In lieu of a full bypass, what many sites have done is just had an escape valve, and I hopefully you can see the exhibit. But rather than putting in a whole second line of blacktop, and that is a huge headache, I know, for Mr. Pugsley and DEP. But sometimes, what we've done is we've put in a safety valve by just an appointing, but on the north-south, on the drive-through lane for Starbucks, we just have an outlet that lets someone get out of the lane, so they don't have to wait for the window. But if they're the 4th car in line, they might have to wait 2 to get to that brink, and I don't wanna draw on the exhibit. But if you would imagine if we extend this yellow tone, which is the concrete, all the way to the south, we then intercept the road that's parallel to 46, that gives us that escape valve,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
the escape valve is at the end. It's not,
Mr. Perino, let me
So, wait,
give you
Mr.
a reality.
DeVito,
One sec.
you want something around the side of just the window.
no, I'm talking about the one side.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't think we
The
can.
problem with that is, that would kill this project. Because DOT, rather, DEP, would require us to go back. We would lose our permit that we have now. Everything would change, and we probably couldn't do this project this way.
Council, you want to carry this to May 29th?
We carried May 29th, with no further notice.
No further notice.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion for that.
We got a second?
Mayor Galise.
Aye.
Councilman LaForgia.
Aye.
Mr. Spila.
Yes.
Mr. Perino.
Aye.
Mr. Dutcher.
Aye.
Chairman Capone.
Aye.
Can I make a request that I get ahead of the guy? On May 29th, can I go ahead of him, so you're in a better mood?
Because we're tired. I think second is better. Have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.